All right. Welcome everyone to our September CAD Users Group live event. Thank you for joining us this morning. My name is Mark McLeod. I'm the CAD Services Manager here at OhioDOT. Just a couple things. We are recording this event and it will be made available on our wiki page either later today or tomorrow. We've been posting all of our recordings there. That's kind of been our new hub for our CAD resources for training and training guides. We do have live chat available, so please type in any questions during the event that you have, and we will field those as the meeting progresses. We will also be providing CPDs for today via email. So look for those at some point in the future, either today or tomorrow. So I just wanted to start off on a couple things. Just our office in general, some of the changes we've had recently. Also wanted to talk about some of our CAD resources available, especially for our ORD, implementation and development. And then some of the things that's happened to the L&D Volume 3 recently as well, some of the changes there, and then kind of an update on our Open Roads Designer transition. So just a little bit about our office. CAD Services, we are located in ODOT Central Office within the Division of Engineering in the Office of CAD Mapping Services. We now have 3 staff and 1 consultant, and our office essentially researches, develops, and implements and supports the engineering CAD standards for the DOT. So some staffing updates. Myself, Mark McLeod, I'm the CAD Services Manager. We also have with us today Jack Herstetter. He's our ProjectWise Manager. Excuse me, John Dursick, or better known as JD. He's been leading our application and open roads development. You'll notice I have a line through Fanita Cheek. She has since retired. Her last day was last Friday, so she has retired from our office. And you'll notice that she was in charge of the L&D Volume 3, so there is an update on that. We also have Matthew Iben. He recently joined our office in April, and he's been assisting JD with our open roads development and support. We also have today Brandon Williams. He works with Jack on ProjectWise and our ProjectWise implementation, and also supports the CAD IT side of things. Kyle Ince is also with us today. He's been assisting our office with our open roads development and support, and also has done some training for us. And then we also have Eric Thomas with us. And as you know, Eric had recently retired from ODOT. He worked with our office for years, and we have him back as a CAD consultant. Just some general updates about our office. Currently, all staff are working from home until January 4th of 2021. That is a date that we received from the governor's office. So that may change at some point, but for now, we will be working from home until January. We plan to continue our CAD user group meetings via Microsoft Teams live events. These seem to be going pretty well. We've had a lot of people sign up for this meeting. We've had, I believe, 250 registered for today, so great turnout. The next CAD user group meeting is tentatively scheduled for December 2nd of this year, so you can check that on your calendars. And then also, I mentioned this previously, we're currently working on updating the sample plans for Open Roads Designer. Unfortunately, our office, we don't do plans in our office, so we've reached out to the districts to try to get some of the plans that they're filing in ORD, so we can utilize those to help supplement the sample plans. Also, I wanted to mention OTEC has gone virtual this year, as many of you may already know. And then I had just some information about OTEC. The registration began August 17th. The attendee registration this year is $50, obviously, so it's because it's not in person. Sponsorship registration is $250. Student registration is $10. And just some other things there. Also, if you have questions on registration or sponsorship, you can contact Lisa Hall. I've provided her email and her phone number there if you're interested in that. Also, OTEC, they're going to span it over several days, October 20th to the 29th. There's going to be 27 sessions, and they're doing 4 sessions per day, 2 in the morning and 2 in the afternoon. And it looks like you can only sign up 1 session per time slot. And they do have CPD hours available, but you must attend the live session in its entirety. Getting on to some of the CAD resources, I always like to point out our CAD website. This is something that we've been trying to keep updated. We do have standards section for our CAD standards manuals, the files download section for our standards for Connect and the Select Series ODOT CAD standards. Revision history, those are running revision histories for both sets of standards currently. Also our training guides, training videos, and then our events like today are posted on there as well. And then we do have a contacts page, so if you need to reach out to one of our staff individually, you can have their email address there and their phone number. And then we also have our software versioning list there for the current versions that we're running. That was recently updated, so that should be current. And then I also wanted to mention our CAD services request. This is kind of an important thing for us because this form comes to our entire office. So if you have an issue, you know, whether it's an ORD or in the Select Series products, GeoPack, whatever, this is really the best form of contacting our office for support. Phone calls typically may go to somebody, and then that person might be off 1 or 2 days, and then, you know, nobody is going to know that phone call was made. So we highly suggest if you have any form of support request, please utilize the form because it does come to everyone in our office. We also have a running record of this too, which is something that we're going to talk about later in the meeting on some of the common requests that we get. So I wanted to point out our Bentley Communities wiki page. This is something that we've been utilizing pretty heavily, especially for training resources. We've been trying to post everything here. So that is the link to our wiki page. We also have that available from our ODOT website as well, under our training links. So definitely recommend utilizing this. The one section I wanted to point out is we have been having internal CAD webinars monthly, and we've had several, as you can see there, widening, resurfacing, existing pavements, right-of-way parcels, advanced templates. These are all recorded and posted under that CAD webinar section of our wiki page. So if there's, you know, there's something there that you would like to, you know, go out and get some information on, I'd highly recommend checking those out. The webinars are recorded, and they're about an hour to an hour and a half. So a lot of good information there. So I wanted to point that out. Also, other training resources there. The CAD meetings that we're doing today, we also record those. Those will be posted there. Some of the custom applications that we develop, videos for that. So this is really kind of the portal to most of our training resources. L&D Volume 3. So this is temporarily, and I underline that, moved to roadway services for publishing. And the main reason is, as I mentioned before, Finita Cheek, who was in charge of the L&D Volume 3, has since retired. We have nobody in our office that really can take this over. So it has been moved temporarily to roadway services. So I don't know where that's going to end up, but for the time being, roadway services is going to help us out with that. I wanted to mention the release date, July 17th of this year. There was a publication for it. There was a revised verbiage in section 1310.2, and that pertained to the drainage features. I believe I mentioned that last meeting, but I wanted to go ahead and reiterate that. And then also the next release date is going to be January 15th of 2021. A couple of things that we're looking at adding is geotechnical sheets to the total plan set numbering. That was something that Geotech had put out there as an update, basically just taking the Geotech sheets and adding them into the total plan sheet numbering. Also, updating the title block verbiage in 1201.6, and this basically says something about the railroad involvement and federal project number. In the old title block of our old plan sheets, we had a section for the railroad involvement and the federal project number, and those were removed for the ORD title sheets and moved off of the title block into the text area there on the right. So the L&D actually calls those out, so we're going to be revising that wording in there. And I also, this is what I had mentioned previously, about the drainage features. When existing and proposed features are located between two cross sections, it is preferred that either additional cross sections be included at the location of the feature, or they be shown on a storm sewer profile sheet. So this is really kind of taking into account the functionality of Open Roads Designer and showing drainage features. Previously, they were shown as being projected to the closest cross section, but some of the functionality of ORD doesn't allow that. So, we wanted to update this to basically say, hey, take a section where the feature is located, or use a storm sewer profile sheet to show that. Also, L&D Volume 3, this is the link to find that off of our webpage. So as I mentioned before, the latest of that is the July 15th iteration there. This is just a screenshot of our website. We also have the sample plans available there as well. Those, as I mentioned before, will be getting updated once we start getting some ORD projects filed and we start putting those together. ORD transition. So new projects started on or after July 1st of 2020 should be completed using Open Roads Designer. Current projects started before July 1st of 2020 should be completed using GeoPack Select Series 4 or 10. So we're not saying you have to use 4, we're not saying you have to use 10. So I know Bentley has put a restriction on the licensing for 4, and they've extended it for 10. So either Select Series is fine. I know some companies are going to be, moving forward with 10. So we wanted to just throw that out there and say, hey, as long as it's in 4 or 10, we're fine with that. ORD waiver process is effective until December 31st of 2020. So that's been extended. And if you need a project waiver for starting a project after July 1st in Select Series 4 or 10, it should be filed and approved before the project begins. And the waiver should be filed by the ODOT project manager. And something I just wanted to kind of throw in here. This is something that recently happened. It was actually yesterday. Um, I'm a tech guy. I like techie things. I'm not the guy that gets excited about a new phone, but I love getting excited about new computer hardware. So NVIDIA launched their new graphics cards yesterday during a special event. They're dubbing it the RTX 3000 series. So if you're familiar with graphics cards, they previously had a last generation graphics card line of the RTX 2000s. I provided the link there. It's a pretty good watch. It's about 30 minutes or so. NVIDIA is advertising a 70% to 80% graphics processing increase, which is huge for one generation. And I was looking back on history, and we haven't seen a generational jump in processing power like this since like 2004, which is huge. And it's going to be at the same cost as the previous generation graphics cards, which is pretty significant. And I wanted to mention that because I know, some people may be looking, or some companies may be looking at buying new computers right now, especially if you're going to be getting into ORD with a lot of the modeling and maybe some rendering and things like that. I would highly recommend holding off and letting these graphics cards hit the hit the mainstream, because these things are going to be a significant increase than the older generation cards. And I did provide just kind of a quick blurb here. They've got a 3090 card, a 3080 card, and a 3070 card. The 3080 card they're saying is their flagship card, which is going to be released on September 17th. It's going to have a starting price of $699. And then the 3070, which is a lower end card, they're actually saying that this is outperforming the previous high end card that they had in the last generation for $499, and it'll be available in October. So if you're looking at possibly buying a new graphics card, I would definitely recommend holding off maybe until these cards hit their release dates and get some of the independent, especially the YouTubers. I watch YouTubers a lot, and they'll put these cards through the test and give some of the recommendations. But I just wanted to throw that out there if anybody's looking at possibly purchasing some new computer hardware. All right, that does it for me. I'm going to turn it over to Matt Iben. He is going to talk about some of the recent ORD updates that we've had.
Okay, thanks, Mark. So the slide was intended to be recent updates, but it's going to end up being more like upcoming updates. So our last standards update was in May, and we discussed those in the June meeting, and our next update will be coming soon. So these are just a highlight of some of the bigger updates that you should be aware of, but always be sure to take a look at the running update log for a complete list of all the changes that were made. In the workset templates, the funding, legislation, and STIP folders were moved from the 100 planning to the 000 admin folders. And the admin plan reviews folder and the survey raw data folders were removed.
Hey Matt, I don't think you're sharing your screen.
I'm not. Thanks for letting me know. All right, so where was I? The 950 reviews folder was added for plan review documents. So I think those were mostly due to security changes within ProjectWise. So if you're an internal ODOT user and need or want those changes on a project, because they're mostly going to apply to new projects, but if you need those changes on your project or want them, you can submit a support request. External users, of course, would follow their own internal procedures there. WMS pointers were added for the OSIP 6-inch best available images. Attaching this on the raster manager will stream those available images for you. Likewise for the National Hydrography dataset and the watershed boundary data set. Those also can be attached and streamed that way. And likewise for the USGS elevation contours and National Public Land Survey System, the WMS files, those can also be attached within Raster Manager. In the feature definitions DGN library, we remove the tangent length labels and move the bearing to be below the center line so it doesn't overlap the stationing text. If you're already using this for a project, you will need to change or update the feature definition in the BK file. And we'll probably post a video to show how to do that. But if you have questions in the meantime, feel free to submit a support request. Eric's going to talk more about the drainage features next, but the generic feature definitions were added for the drainage structures and drainage pipes. And I think that those were previously included and then removed, so they're being added back in. The default survey preferences were added to edited to add a VBA processing definitions for generic survey drainage field pipe field codes. So the VBA processing will draw the culverts and pipes 12 inches and larger with custom line styles now. We also added element templates and feature definitions for undercut areas on templates and cross sections, and a new template point EW table was added. Currently, the earthwork table is annotated if the PGL point is included in a template, but if it's not included, that table does not get annotated. So adding the EW table null point will also trigger the annotation of that earthwork table if the PGL point does not exist in your template. A new level element template and feature definition for the ramp gore lines was added, and a new level for the drainage transition was added for use with the drainage transition features, the drainage node transition features. Lastly, for the feature definition DGN library, levels for existing and proposed generic nodes were added for the pavement spread calculations. As far as the feature definition or DGN library for drainage and utilities, feature definitions were added for combined sewer systems. So there's two there for a sanitary storm pipe and a sanitary pipe. And feature definitions were added for manhole types 2 and 3 for the sanitary nodes to the features that you are listed there. The feature definition shown here was removed for the existing sanitary and storm line, and a couple of head walls were also added. If you need additional head walls or pipe features added, submit a support request, and I think we have a few that were recently submitted that are kind of in the queue waiting to be added in here.
Hey, Matt, if I could chime in on this,
Sure.
all those sanitary storm stuff that you see added, that was added so that it would work in conjunction, like when you had a combined system. The way it was before, they were classified as a different network type, so you couldn't connect to like your regular storm line features. So that's all those changes were kind of around making that work together. That came from, support requests that came in. So if you're wondering why that stuff was added, that's why, because we kind of had it before, but it wasn't really conducive for those combined networks. So I just kind of fixed it up.
Thanks. That's sort of why I'm stumbling through here. I'm not as familiar with those few updates there. So. All right, and lastly for the drainage, all manhole inlet catch basin element templates were added or updated, excuse me, to either use the drainage existing cells or the drainage proposed cell levels. And the sanitary manhole element templates was fixed to use the sanitary cells level rather than the sanitary line level. And there were a few other updates that I omitted for drainage, so be sure to check that running update log. And feel free to reach out if you have questions on any of those. Related to the generic drainage codes that I mentioned earlier, the data collector code lists were also updated for the same structure and pipe codes that were also shown earlier, and they're also listed here. And in the template ITL file, also as mentioned earlier, the undercut and earthwork table were added to the point name list. And the GORE templates had minor corrections to the horizontal feature constraints. So you can take a look at those if you need to. So on the OhioDOT applications, we have some updates here. The Balloon app will now place all graphics using the active color, and the existing storm sewer was updated for the same generic codes that I've mentioned before. And it also now disallows the alphabetic characters in the numeric input fields. OHDOT survey VBA is a new visual basic application that ORD survey uses to draw the drainage pipes with the dual line custom line styles if those are greater than or equal to 12 inches. It will also annotate the pipe sizes and types. And the sheet manager had a problem or fixed a problem with the import from Excel process that was formatting some numbers to dates. It was also optimized to load DGN files in the background to speed up the processing and an issue with crashing. An issue from a previous version was also fixed. The program would crash if you were updating the active file from ProjectWise. And a few other code updates were made just to make the app more stable. The Sheet Cells app had some stability updates, and the Notes app had a couple typos fixed in the online document that was used to populate the list of note files within the application. So those were the signals note and the roadway note files had a couple typos and weren't being shown in the list. All right, and my last slide, all of the note files were updated to be current with the July 2020 DRRC updates, except for the bridge notes. Unfortunately, there just hasn't been time to get to all of those. But new note files for the 2020 BDMs were currently being worked on by Fanita before her retirement. So we need to catch up on where she left off there and get those published as soon as we can. That's all I have, Mark. I think we're on to Eric next.
All right.
Okay, give me just a second to get my presentation up. Okay, are you able to see my screen?
Yeah, looks good, Eric.
Okay. Well, good morning, everyone. I'm going to talk about some upcoming changes to some of the drainage things specific to survey, and then get into modeling the existing drainage information. And I was allocated 45 minutes, and I'm going to be a little long, so thank you, Matt, for giving me a little extra time there. I was a little concerned. Probably not too much longer than that, but we'll see how it goes. So the main topics I want to cover, as Matt mentioned, in some of the upcoming updates to the standards. We're restoring some of the older survey field codes that were retired. So we'll talk about that and talk about how that impacts our data collection procedures and survey processing options. And the last thing we'll talk about is generating that 3D model from the existing drainage information. So just a little background information. Back in SS3 in the Open Roads Technology Tools, ODOT implemented some new data collection processes for the drainage items. And that came from input from some different surveying consultants. And so it was adopting a process, or just adding a process that would allow drawing the drainage pipes using a CSV file with the information for the pipe. So connecting from point to point with the elevations and all that stuff. When we did that, we moved several of the old field codes to be retired, but they were not removed from the standards, just for compatibility with ongoing projects. So since those codes were never removed, some surveyors never made the transition to the new processes in the Select Series products, going back to Select Series 3. So as we moved into ORD, those retired field codes were removed from the OhioDOT standards for ORD. So as some of the surveying consultants and some of ODOT surveyors are making the transition to ORD, they're finding those codes are gone and they hadn't adopted the new processes yet. So we've had a couple requests to consider reinstating some of those retired codes. So I guess why do that? Well, it allows the field personnel to use the methods that best meet the survey type. And by survey type, I mean how much drainage is out there. So if there's only a few pipes and they're open culverts and you're picking up each end of the pipe, you don't necessarily need to use a CSV file to process that. If it's a larger project with, a lot of drainage information, you may end up sending someone out later to record the pipe information that terminates in each of those culverts, and then using that CSV file to process is a pretty good workflow. So there's different types of survey, different field conditions, and just different operational procedures and preferences. So the intent here is to allow some different options instead of forcing everyone into one workflow that may or may not be great for the type of survey that they're doing. Another reason is the catch basin types are not always known. So ODOT was moving towards field codes that were based on specific ODOT catch basins, manholes, and inlets, and those generic codes were removed. But there's other things out there that are not ODOT specific drainage structures. It may just be a square catch basin of some sort. So it makes sense to leave that CBS for the catch basin square, or CBR for the catch basin round. It makes sense to leave those in there for other catch basins that aren't specific ODOT types, and you just need something that represents a type of catch basin. Another thing that came up was the generic codes removing a potential liability for a structure type that might be identified incorrectly. So I had talked to some survey consultants that were a little uncomfortable saying, hey, this is a specific type of catch basin, when they may not be 100% sure, and they just didn't want anyone coming back on them and saying, well, that's not a CB2-2B, it's a 2-2A. So the generic codes kind of remove any of that potential. So as Matt had in his presentation and upcoming updates, the codes for open pipes and culverts are going to be added back into the standards, and those are listed there. And then the codes for the generic drainage structure types will be added back as well. So these are supplemental to the codes that are in there for a specific type. So you could still use, whichever codes you are comfortable with. The ones for the type will not be removed. Those will stay in there. These are just supplementing those. So this doesn't change any field procedures if you're using the CSV file for processing. So the CSV process is still supported, and we're not removing that option from the workflow. We're just adding back in some older workflows that were working well that some people just prefer to use. So I was a little worried that we're going to have too many options and it's going to be confusing. So it really boils down to 3 different options. So the first option is, hey, I've got some open pipes and culverts and I'm going to use mapping codes, begin line, end line. So that first process, I'm taking a shot on each end of the open pipe or the culvert, and I'm going to use that begin line, end line code to draw that linear feature. So that's the first method that you could use in the field for coding and collecting this information. The second is the CSV file process that can be used for open pipes and culverts, and it can also be used for pipes that connect up to a drainage structure. So that's been around since Select Series 3 as an option. And the third method is going back again to some older VBA processing that ODOT had provided, where I'm using attributes stored on the drainage pipes, and then I'm going to draw those connecting pipes with a Visual Basic application. So that would be the option where in the data collector itself, when it's you're storing a particular structure type, and I'll just use the generic code, maybe this catch basin square, you're going to enter the pipe information as an attribute using those P1, P2, P3, P4, and P5 attributes that we had supported in the past. So that process is also going to be available in Open Roads. So let's talk about each of these 3 methods. And the first one is just open pipes and culverts. And again, that's going to be used when you're taking a shot on both ends of the pipe, and you'll use those mapping codes for begin line and end line, and there's the generic field codes. These codes in the old standards had 3 attributes for size, location, and condition. So these codes did not use the P1 attribute. It just used those attributes. So with this method, I am looking at the size attribute to get the size of that particular pipe. So when it's mapped in survey, we can draw that at the width of the pipe. So there's an example of what it would look like. So this is just a 15-inch CMP, a shot at each end with a begin line and end line. And when it's processed, we're going to add an ODOT survey VBA to the standards. And this VBA will run anytime that particular code, CMP, a linear feature, is either drawn or deleted or edited. So it will update the label, update the information. So any pipe that's 12 inches or larger will be drawn using the custom line style. And again, that size attribute is read to define the width, and a label is placed as shown. Here's an example of some drainage information that was collected for some open pipes and culverts using a begin line and end line mapping code, and using the feature definitions that have been restored in the ODOT standards. It'll be in our next update. So looking at this CSV file, it's just a CSV open in Excel, and I've got point name, northing, easting, and an elevation. There's my field code for a corrugated metal pipe with a begin line asterisk, BL asterisk, mapping code, and 3 attributes: size, location, and condition, and then the values for the size, the location, and the condition. So the next line is just the next point, coordinates, ending that first line, and then its attribute information. So I've just got some different testing examples here of all the different field codes, and also included a couple different formats for how the user may have entered the data. So I want to make note that the inches symbol is not required. I'm just testing what happens if the user did enter those in the data collector. So moving on down, here's an example where there were no attributes in the data collector at all. So that'll draw the line, but it won't label it with the size. And lastly, some culverts with begin line, end line, sizes. And here's an example where they didn't enter the attributes. And here they forgot to enter the begin line and end line. So no linear feature actually will be drawn. But I should mention that the anything that's an elliptical pipe, the format is rise by span. So I'm going to go ahead and close that, and I've already processed this file. So here's the lines that were drawn in. I'm just going to zoom in here on the ones towards the bottom. So the first one's my 15-inch CMP, and you can see it's annotated with a label and a direction of flow. So that's coming from the size attribute, and that's the field code. And then the line itself is drawn using a custom line style. So if I select that, you can see in my properties that it's using the custom line style for storm line. And if you look under the extended group here, under line style parameters, you can see it's scaled 15 to determine the width of that. So here's an elliptical pipe, again, rise by span. So the VBA reads the second value to determine the width. There's a 6-inch pipe, and anything that's less than 12 inches will be drawn with a single line. And then up here, I've got a 36-inch, so you can see that's clearly wider than the other ones. So looking at the top at our culverts that were drawn, a couple of different line styles are used here. So this is a 3-foot by 6-foot culvert, and if I select that, I can see the line style that was used was a culvert 606. This one is using a line style culvert 10. So those don't use a line style scale them. Those actually use different line styles for the culverts. Here's the one where they did not enter attributes, and then there's the one where no line was entered. This one I would need to just create a line in Survey, and then once I have that line, I can assign attributes to it. So here's how you can assign attributes. If I select this element, the attributes would be on the points and in the line itself. In order for it to draw this, I only need to define the attributes on the line. So ideally, I would probably go back to the CSV file and add that attribute information there and reprocess, but it could be done here. So if I look at my properties for this line and go down to a linear feature, there's an attributes pair field. If I click in that field, I get a little box I can select that will give me this attributes dialog where I can add some attributes. So I'm going to add an attribute here for size and just give it a value. Maybe that's, I don't know, 4 by 8. And as soon as I accept this, the line is redrawn since a change has been made. So it's going to redraw that using the appropriate line style for that, and then annotate that as well. Let's take a look at what happens if I make an edit to the survey data. So I'll show you a couple different edits. If I just pick that and just move it, and I know you probably don't normally do this type of edit on a pipe, but just to illustrate a point, if I just move that point, you can see it's redrawn the label and the direction arrow. So it is sensitive to edits. And another type of edit you may do, this is probably more of a real world example, maybe you need just to go in and change the elevation on this. So I'm going to go to the properties for that particular point. And I'm going to make this the higher of the two. So I'm just going to change that to 1002. And it's reprocessed that since a change was made. And you can see now my annotation is pointing in the other direction and the label's flipped. So the labels are placed from the high side pointing to the low side and then above the element in that direction. So in this case, high side to the low side and above puts it upside down. And we've elected not to attempt to flip these around, because if you think about how this is going to be used by design, when they reference this information, it's going to get rotated into sheets, and it could end up being upside down regardless of how it's oriented here in this file. So if you need to flip those around, that's something that would have to be done later once it's brought into sheets, and you can see how it's going to show up on a sheet if that needs to be changed. So it's just an overview of the processing that happens with our VBA macro that runs behind the scenes. And actually, I probably should show you that before I wrap this up. If I go up to Open Road Standards and look at my active file, there's a list of all the standards that have been copied into this file as the data was processed. Well, one of those is our survey settings. So if I click on our survey settings, under general settings, you can see there's a use VBA macros option that's set to true. So that's a change in the Ohio standards, is to go use a VBA macro. And then the next item down, VBA feature macros, defines how those macros are applied to the particular field codes. So if it's a linear object using this field code, there's a macro it's going to run every time that's drawn or redrawn or edited. So each of those field codes go out and run that macro. And that's what sizes our custom line style and draws our annotation. So with that, I'm going to go ahead and wrap up this video, and we'll take a look at the next processing option. So that VBA and stuff will be distributed in the next update to the CAD standards. And that's our first method where we're just using that begin line, end line. Second method would be using a CSV file, and many of you may be familiar with this. And in this case, we don't need a shot on each end, or if we do have a shot, we don't need the begin line and end line mapping codes. The CSV processing is going to do everything to draw those lines between the points. This can be used on open pipes and culverts, or it can be used on pipes that are connected to a drainage structure itself. And as I said earlier, this was originally introduced with the SS3 standards for ODOT CAD. And I know some people have been using this method for a while now. So in the field, I'm taking a shot for the drainage structure itself, and then the pipe information is recorded by field notes, either on paper or using a tablet with a spreadsheet, however you want to record the information for those pipes that terminate within that drainage structure. A shot on the pipe is not required at the drainage structure, just the information. So that information would be, how far down is it from the grate, what's the size and material. So on an open pipe or culvert, I would need a shot on each end, but I'm not using that begin line, end line to have the survey processing draw it, unless I'm using the those field codes for the specific pipe type, but it would just be the PIO for a pipe inlet or outlet shot, and or a CULV for a culvert shot. So the mapping codes aren't required, and there's really no data collector attributes required for this. Everything's going to be read from the CSV file itself. So if you're not familiar with this, here's the CSV file format. And again, you're going to have to put this together based off your field notes or a spreadsheet, but the CSV file is going to have the first point name and the depth of the pipe measured down from the grate at that particular point, or the elevation of the pipe. So I'm showing both there. The second point has an elevation of 491.5. The others have a depth measured down. Then the size and material, and then which point does it connect up to, and the depth or the elevation at that point. So with this format, when it's processed, any depth value that's over 200, it assumes that's an elevation. So if it's less than 200, it assumes it's a measurement from the survey shot itself. And there's a VBA application that's out there now to process this CSV file, and you'll see as we go through this that we've made some updates to this VBA application itself. Let's take a look at a simple example using a CSV file to draw the drainage pipe information. So I have two CSV files open in Excel, and the first one is actually that one's the first one, is defining the points for my survey data. So I've got just the point number, the northing, the easting, the elevation, and then the feature definition, and then the attributes, size, material, and condition, and then the values for each of those attributes. So the second point has its point name, northing, easting, elevation, and again the field code and attributes. Now notice for this culvert, I'm not using a begin line or inline mapping code. Use just the points that are stored when the survey data is processed, and our CSV file will define how these points are connected. Okay, I also have points for a catch basin square, 3 of those, and a pipe inlet or outlet point. And again, on each of these, they have attributes, but in this case, none of the attributes have values. So our CSV processing does not read any of these attributes. We'll have to define the size and material and dip information in our CSV file. So let's go ahead and take a look at that CSV file. So this is the CSV file with my information to connect the pipes. So the format is in the PowerPoint. It's also in the drainage surveys PDF information and ODOT's training material. But just to review it, it's the first point name and then the dip at that point, and then the size and material, then the connecting point and the dip at that point. And the dip is measured from the elevation of the point itself. And this can be either a depth value, like here the dip is 0, or it can be an elevation. So anything greater than 200, when it's processed, it'll assume that as an elevation. So those two actually define the culvert, our 6-foot by 10-foot culvert. And if I want that to be annotated as a culvert instead of concrete, I can change this to culvert here. Then the next is, again, point pairs, point name, the dip at that point, size, material, connecting point, and the dip there. Our last one is our point pipe inlet or outlet, so it has a dip of 0. The elevation was taken directly at the invert of the pipe. Okay, so I'm going to go ahead and close this. And it's asking me if I want to save changes, so yeah, I do want to save those changes. I'm going to make sure we keep that as a CSV file and save those. Okay, so here are the points that have already been processed using the Open Road Survey tools. So I'm just going to run the CSV file to connect these up, and then we'll take a look at the culvert points as well. So I'm in the OhioDOT workflow on the Apps tab, and over to the right we have some survey tools. So we'll use the existing pipes tool. And this is looking for a field book. It's reading the points from the field book. So I do have to process this in a field book file that has my survey data. I can tell it to label the pipes, turn that on or off, and I need to tell it the CSV file that I'm processing, is that storm sewer or sanitary information. So you do need to split storm sewers and sanitary sewers into separate CSV files for processing. So I'll go ahead and browse for my CSV file. And I'll pick my CSV file that I'm processing and go ahead and tell it to process that file. So you can see the pipes that are drawn, the labels that are placed, and all the information is there. Now, this information is just microstation graphics drawn in the file. This is not in any way associated with the drainage data itself. So if I deleted any of these points, that will not delete this information. So I do a fit. I can take a look at the culvert that was drawn. So down here, I can see the culvert line graphic that was drawn and then the label that was placed for that. So that's just a simple example of processing and connecting the pipes using a CSV file. So again, on that method, you might find that most useful on large projects that have a lot of drainage information and you don't want to collect attributes as you're surveying those points. You can go back out later and get the pipe information, like I said, either in field notes or in a tablet, something like that. So let's take a look at the next option. So the method 3 is using the attributes from the data collector. And this is an option that we had supported in the Select Series software and elected not to carry forward into Open Roads. And the biggest reason we didn't carry that forward was because some of the downstream processes, and I probably have that on another slide, so I'm probably getting ahead of myself here. But anyway, the attribute values are entered as the drainage information is surveyed. And again, the mapping codes are not going to be used. We're going to draw those pipes using Visual Basic application. So the attributes support up to 5 pipes and a note. So there's the attributes that could be stored on a particular drainage structure, on a catch basin, manhole, or inlet. So P1 for the first pipe, and then the attribute format is the dip, the size, the material, and the direction separated by hyphens. So again, the depth is just a depth down from the grate to the pipe invert. So it's just taking a measurement down to the pipe invert, and then the size, material, and direction. So there's an example, 3.75-12, and then dash the material concrete, and then to the south. So you can have up to 5 pipes are supported by the VBA processing. There's 5 attributes on the field codes. And you could have a note stored with that as well. So the survey data is processed as usual using Open Road Survey. And then after processing, we'll use the existing storm sewers VBA to review and edit those attributes, and then to draw the drainage pipes from point to point. So I think the next slide is probably the video for that. Let's take a look at the third method that you could use to draw your drainage pipe information. So what I have open is a CSV file that has some survey points that I've already imported, and I just want to review this a bit. So here's a point number SB130, it's northing, easting, and elevation. That's a catch basin square, and then its attributes. So there's the 5 pipes, P1, P2, P3, P4, and P5, and then there would also be an N5 attribute. And for each of the pipe attributes, the format is the dip, size, material, direction. So the dip is just the depth down to the invert of the pipe, subtracted off the elevation of the structure itself. So below that, I've got a flow line point. I just put it 10 feet down for testing. So that's the bottom of the drainage structure. And then I have some pipe inlet or outlets. So on that particular field code, there's only one attribute for P1, and then there's its values for its dip, size, material, and direction. And since this is on the outlet of a pipe and it was taken at the invert, the dip is 0. So I've got a couple more PIO shots with no attributes just for testing. I have a floor direction only shot for testing. And most of my testing was with the old pipe code or the old drainage codes that we restored. But I do want to make sure that you're aware that the type specific codes also work with this. So I'm just using the CBS for most of my testing and demonstration here. So I'll go ahead and move this out of the way. And as I said, I have the data mapped. So let's take a look at running the Visual Basic application to draw our pipe information. So from our workflows, I'll choose the OhioDOT workflow. And on the Apps tab, we're going to go over here to the survey group and grab the existing pipes Visual Basic application. So there's two options we want to look at when we're drawing the pipes in using the attributes. First is check attributes, and then we'll look at manual selection. So in the check attributes tab, there's two functions. One is running a check of all the drainage points in the field book, and it's looking for any errors in the dip, size, material, direction. So I'll run that check, and I can see it found 2 points where it found some problems, and those are highlighted in yellow over here. So I can see that the dip size and the material and direction are not correct, and it's missing material and direction for this one. So I'm going to go ahead and enter that information. So maybe that's a CMP to the north, let's say. And as soon as I enter that, it's going to check that format to make sure there's 4 values, and it clears that for us. So the next one, maybe this one goes to the east, and then I've got one to the south. And maybe this is just bogus information, so I'm just going to delete these 2 out. So once I've made my corrections, I can go ahead and update attributes. And what that does is just write these attributes back to the survey point that's stored in our field book. So I'll go ahead and update those attributes. So I can review that on the point itself. Looking down here, this is my point SB002. And if I just float the cursor over it, I get the pop-up menu with its attributes. And I can see about, I don't know, 6 or 7 items down. It says attributes pair, and then it lists those values for the P1, P2, and P3 that I corrected. So I have one more point to correct, and maybe this is just bogus information, so I'm just going to delete that and update those attributes. And it tells me there are no more problems found. So you definitely want to run that check before you go to the manual selection mode. Another option that we have here is review all. What this does is just looked at all of our points and gives me a list of our drainage features that it finds in the field book. And if I click on one of those features, I can see those attributes and review those. Now this might be useful if you like to use field notes to record this information. And then when you get back in the office, you want to enter that information and store that with your points. You could do that with the survey software itself, but this might be a little easier option for you just to come in and add that information. So I could just type in those values. Maybe the dip on this one's 3.6, and it's a 15-inch CMP going to the east. And as soon as I update those attributes, that's just written back to that point. So if I click on it and then click back, it rereads it from the field book, and I can verify that those attributes are stored with the point. So now we're ready to go over to manual selection since our check doesn't reveal any problems. So I'll go ahead and pick the manual selection mode. And this will look familiar to those of you who have used the attributes with the Select Series 4 software. We had an application that would read the attributes from the drainage points or the survey points that are stored in the GPK file. And again, the difference here is they're stored in the field book. So to do any of this stuff, I must be in that field book design file. Okay, so I'm going to get started by selecting my first drainage point. So I'll use this button select, and I'm going to come over here and let's zoom in a bit and just click on this catch basin square. So it's reading all the attributes for that particular structure and showing that. And what it's done here is it's converted the dips to an elevation. So it's just taken the dip value and subtracted it from the elevation of that survey shot. So if I want to go ahead and pick a second point, I can pick the command, but the way I have this structured is when you pick the first one and accept it, it's ready for the second one. In fact, if you read the prompts down in the lower left, it says select second survey element. Anyway, I'll just go ahead and click on an element. So this is one of those PIO shots that did not have any attributes. So what we're doing is allowing you to enter a dip value if you need to do that. So I'm going to go ahead and connect a pipe between these. So on this structure, I can see I have a pipe going to the south, a 6-inch CPP. So I'll select that particular option and go ahead and draw between those points. So that's annotated with the information from drainage point 1. And it was 6-inch, so it's showing that as a single line. So I'm going to go ahead and select a second point. I'll just pick this one, SB133, which I know doesn't have attributes either. And I have a pipe going to the southeast, concrete, so I'll go ahead and connect those together. So let's pick another one. This SB131 does have a P1 attribute, so it's going to show me those values. So I've got a pipe going to the east, and that one says it goes back to the west, so those must connect. But I can see here that this was listed as a 12-inch CMP, but on that one it was listed as a 12-inch concrete, so there's a difference. So I want to point that out just to make sure you know that the application always uses the information from drainage point 1 for the label and the material. So when I draw that in, it's going to use that information, even though this may be different. And that includes the size. If the sizes are different, it's just going to annotate it with what's listed in the first point. If you need to make a change to that, that's up to you to manually edit that text and make those changes. Okay, I want to point out that this will work with the codes that are intended for use with a BL asterisk and EL asterisk. So any of these points, there's a 15-inch CMP that was collected for the open pipe with a BL asterisk and EL asterisk mapping code. I'm going to go ahead and use that to connect up. So if I select that point, and there was one going to the west, and it says it's an elliptical pipe, I'm going to go ahead and connect those together. So that's, again, using the label from the drainage point 1. So any of those field codes that are intended to be used with a mapping code, those don't have the P1 and P2 attributes. They just have size, material, and condition. But it does give you the opportunity to enter a dip value if you need to do that. So those of you who have used this workflow in the Select Series software know that ODOT had provided some Visual Basic applications for downstream operations. And what I mean by that is, so in the plant production side, you could read this information in order to draft it on the profiles or the cross sections. Open Roads uses the 3D model to show information on profiles and cross sections, so we will not be providing any downstream applications to read this data. This is intended for the plan view and plan production side of things, showing the survey information. So to model this in 3D is the next step that we're going to take a look at. So as I said in the video, if we're going to show this on profiles and cross sections, it has to be modeled. So that's a pretty common question. Why is a 3D model needed? So that's exactly why. If I'm going to be showing that on profile and cross sections, I've got to have 3D object for this. Another reason you might want to generate that is, does the designer need to run any clash detection? So if they need to do that, we need some 3D features. Maybe the proposed drainage ties into the existing, and again, I would need that existing information as 3D drainage features and as nodes using the drainage and utility software. So that 3D version is required. So we've had some questions on this. Who generates the 3D model? Does a surveyor generate this, or does design? And it could be either. within ODOT, some of the district survey personnel are comfortable generating the 3D model, and they want to do that, and they are taking the attitude that, hey, this is coming from survey, so we're going to do it. But it should not be assumed that the 3D model is a standard survey deliverable. We've had some questions on that. So just because we show it in a survey training material doesn't necessarily mean it's a standard deliverable. So if you're scoping a sub-consultant to provide survey information and you want a 3D model, I would suggest that you put that in the scope of services and don't just assume it's something that will be delivered. So just wanted to point that stuff out, that it's not really specified anywhere that this is something that survey will always deliver. Another question is, hey, which design file do I use for that 3D model? And I'm going to say we do not want you to put this information in the field book. It should be in a separate drainage base map, and that would go under the 400 engineering drainage base maps folders, and then you would reference the survey data to extract a 3D model in that BD design file. So next slide might be a video. I might have another slide. I don't remember. Let's see. Nope, at least one more. So our workflow, once we've created that BD file and referenced the survey, is to extract the drainage structures first, and then place the drainage pipes second. And then afterwards, as you're going, you will need to review and edit both the structures and the pipes as necessary, and you'll see that in the video that I have for this. So we're going to use the extract from graphic tool to extract the drainage structures, and there's some utility filters that have been defined to go out and find that information, and depending on which feature it sells to, or which feature it finds, what cell it finds, to set the appropriate feature definition for the 3D information itself. So those filters define quite a few things, actually. The search parameters for top and bottom of the structure. So it's going to look for that cell that defines the drainage structure itself, whether it's a catch basin square, catch basin round, or any of the specific, like a CB4 or CB5 or any of the specific types. It will also look for a bottom source element, and that's going to be the F line cell. So there is a field code F line for the flow line. So in the field, when we talked about the survey side, they should be taking a shot at the grate, and then we do need an F line point to define the depth. If there isn't a F line point, it's just going to place the 3D structure at a default depth. There's also a search radius defined in that filter where it's looking for that flow line cell. So in my video, I talk a little bit about that and some problems you might run into with that. And the last thing that the filter defines is the feature definition for the 3D structure itself. Let's take a look at extracting our drainage information in a 3D model. So to get started, I'm going to create a new design file for that model. I definitely don't want to put that in my field book. So in our OhioDOT workflow, under the Apps tab, I'm going to use the Create Design Files application and change my category to drainage, and then just click off to apply that filter. And what I'm creating is a drainage base map, and this will be a 2D file, and I'm going to give this a comment of my existing drainage 3D model. And I'll go ahead and create that file. And in my settings, I have the option turned on to automatically open the last created file. So it's going to go ahead and open that file for me once it's created. Okay, so then once I'm here, I'm going to go to the Home tab and use the Attach tools to attach my survey information. And then I'll do a fit. So I've got 4 round catch basins I'm going to use here as an example. And to extract the 3D information, I need the cell itself, and then I also need the flow line for that cell. So when I extract the information, it's going to look for the cell for the feature and grab that elevation for the top, and then it's going to grab this flow line point for the elevation for the bottom. If that point's not present, it's just going to use a default value for the depth. So let's take a look at how this is done. So I'm going to change my workflow to the drainage and utilities workflow. And on the layout tab, there's an option to extract from graphics, and there's also a filter manager. So we've already set up some filters in the ODOT standards. So in the features DGN library for drainage and utilities, you'll see there's some filters, and these are all the different catch basin types. So that catch basin round is a CB7-X. So there's a CB7-X filter here that defines those parameters for that. So the default depth you can see here is set to -3.281. This is on my to-do list, is to go through these filters and make sure we have appropriate values for the default depth. And then I have a search radius of 10, and this is a recent change that will go out in our next step. I'm going to pause that there. I actually ended up using a search radius of 12, so that's not 100% accurate. Update. So I'll talk about the search radius a bit once I process this, but what that is, it's going to look for that element that defines the bottom within that search distance. So there's the individual filters, and then these filters have been put into groups. So here's a group of all catch basins, and what that is just a list of all the different catch basin types. So if I were to process this, I could pick one of these filter groups, or I could pick an individual filter for what it's looking for. So that's what's read from the library. This is in my active file. If there were any filters created in this file, that's where they would show up. And then there's tools here to create filters. And if I'm doing that, I'm just defining all of these different properties for what it's searching for, what feature it's going to place, and all that stuff. So let's go ahead and run this and see how it works. So I'm going to use the extract from graphic option. And the first time I click that in the file, it's going to tell me that it's going to create a utility model in the file, and this is not undoable, and do you want to proceed? So that's why we want to make sure we're doing this in a separate design file and not in our survey field book. We don't want any of this information in the survey field book. So I'm going to go ahead and hit yes, and it's going to go ahead and create that database in this file for the utility information. And then when it's finished, it doesn't put me back into the command. So I do need to go select the command again in order to run the command. And there it's complete. So I'll go ahead and click the extract from graphic command to run the command. So there's some different options here. I can use by selection set or utility filter. I'm going to use a filter, and I have the option here to use the element 3D elevations, or I can have it read it from a terrain model. I'm going to use the element itself, not doing any trenching, and then I need to select which filter I'm going to process. So I can use the all catch basins, inlets, or manholes, or I can come down and pick an individual catch basin, inlet, or manhole type. So I'll just go ahead and process the all catch basins filter. And if I want to, I can hit the preview here, and that'll show me anything that's going to meet the selected filter. So I can see both the catch basin and the flow line both are highlighting. So I'll turn the preview off. And design stages, we don't have any design stages set up, so that's not really applicable to this. So I'm going to go ahead and accept my options. I'm going to pause that for a second. I've noticed sometimes when I click that preview, it hasn't been accurate what it's showing me. I've seen more things highlight than what it actually picks up. So I don't know, I haven't reported anything to Bentley there, but I have noticed that that preview doesn't always accurately show me exactly what it's going to pick up. Here, and it's going to go search for any elements that meet any of those filters that are in the all catch basins filter. And when it's done, I should have some 3D objects for all of these drainage structures. So it's finished processing, and I can see some new graphics that are drawn here. And I'll talk about those in a second. Let's take a look at our 3D model. So I'll hold down my right mouse button until view control pops up, and I'm going to select two views, plan and 3D. And that's just going to open up a second view and show me my 3D model. And if I activate that view and do a fit, I can see all the stuff that was extracted. Let's just focus on these four and talk about a couple options on these four. So I'm going to zoom in on these and just rotate it around a bit, take a look at those. And I purposely placed these close together to illustrate something. So what I'm going to do is select one of these items. So that's the one here in the lower left. I'm going to go ahead and select that one and look at its properties. So over here in the properties view, I can see for the utility, it's ground elevation and it's invert elevation. So again, that's red from the cell for the top and then that flow line cell. And I can see it's at 991. The way I ran these in, I think this was at 992, this was at 993, and that was at 994, or something like that. Just some different values. So the second one, I see it's at 992. This is the third point, it's at 993. And the fourth point should be at 994, and I can see over here it says 993. So what's happened is that search radius of 10 foot, this one has found the first flow line point and used that for the elevation on this one. So the search radius is not just a depth, but it's also within a plan. So it's kind of a 3D search from the best I can tell. And if there's another point that falls within that radius, it's going to find the first one it finds. So if this should be 994, I can select this, and in its properties, I can change that to 994 and enter that, and then it's adjusted the elevation of that over here. As far as the graphics that are drawn in my plan view, so I have my reference survey information, then I have my 3D information, and then the process also draws a cell in this file in the 2D view. So let's drill down through that a little bit. So I'm going to come over here and select my references or my attach tools and look at what's been attached. So as soon as I process that in this file, it made a 3D model and then attached that 3D model as a reference to my 2D view. I'm going to go ahead and turn that off. And now what I'm seeing here is the graphics that are drawn in this file for that catch basin, as well as the survey. So if I turn off the survey reference, I can see the graphic that's drawn in this file when it did the extraction process. So for a plan view purpose, you're probably not going to want to reference this file and show this information. You really want to reference that 3D base map, and you really only need the 3D information from this file. But we just wanted to point out that there is a 2D cell that's placed in this file. And if I select that, that has some properties like the rotation and the elevation. So a round catch basin, it doesn't really matter, but if this were a square catch basin with a big vault underneath it, I may want to rotate that into a proper orientation. So that's what this cell is used for, is to manipulate the rotation of these 3D graphics. So that's just an overview of the process to extract the structures. The next video we'll take a look at how we can connect the pipes up. So the pipes, unfortunately, we can't just extract those using a filter. We're going to need to place those manually. So I'm going to have a node at each end of the pipe, and then we use the place conduit command. And after we place that, we're going to have to go back and review and correct the elevations for both the pipe and the structure itself. And we'll show some of that in the video. So the question is, why not set up utility filters for the pipe sizes and types? Well, for that to work, each pipe size and type would need to be defined with unique symbology. And right now they're not. They're all on the same level. They're the same color and same weight. And they do have a custom line style, but the custom line style, the only thing that's different is the scale. And there's no way in the filters to read that to get its size. So for that to work, I'd have to have separate field codes for each pipe size and type. And I don't think any survey guys want to have 100 field codes for concrete and 100 field codes for a CMP and 100 for a, et cetera. Now that we're using a VBA to process those open pipes and culverts that are collected with the begin line, end line, we could possibly look at having the VBA draw those with maybe concrete is one color and a CMP is a different color, and a corrugated plastic pipe's a different color, and then filter to find them based on the color. So that's a possibility. Another possibility is to, instead of scaling the line style, to create a line style for every different size. So that way you could have a 12-inch line style, a 15-inch line style, and if it's green, it's concrete. If it's a 15-inch line style and it's, whatever, yellow, then we know it's a corrugated metal pipe. So it's possible. I don't know if we want to go down that road or not, but I'm certainly open to discussing that. So we can take a look at that for a future update. So for now, it is a manual process to extract the pipes, and I do need a node at each end. And the next slide is probably the video for that. Well, let's take a look at generating 3D conduits for our drainage pipes. So what I've got in my plan view is just one of my drainage structures and some pipes that I drew using the Visual Basic application. And over in my 3D view, I've got a couple of structures here. So in order to put a pipe in, I need 2 nodes. So this structure that I've extracted is a node when we did our extract graphics for that. And what I need is a node to connect to. So I could connect a pipe between these 2 structures since I have 2 nodes just by selecting those nodes and using the create conduit command. So I'm going to go back in my workflows to drainage and utilities. Under layout, there's place conduit. So that's the command that we need to use. So for the PIO points, I need a node at each of those PIO points. And what I've done is made some changes today that allow us to use the extract from graphics tool to extract those PIO points. So before I run that tool, a couple things I changed today. The point or the cell that's used for these, you zoom in on that a bit. Third item down is the cell name is PIO. So for those points and also for the 4 direction only and then the flow line of the structure, those were using the same cell. There was a survey point cell, SVPT, and I couldn't use a filter since they were all the same cell. So what I did is I made a PIO cell, made an FDO for the 4 direction only, and I made a flow line cell, F line for that, and changed the element templates for those. So moving forward, when you map your data, those will use 3 different cells, and that allows me to extract that graphic uniquely. So I'm going to go to the extract graphic command, and using a utility filter, I'm going to use the 3D element elevations, and my filter is the PIO, and that's just going to get these points. So I'll go ahead and accept my parameters, and it does the extraction. And when that's extracted, I can see in the 2D view some triangles, and in the 3D view some triangles with those elevations. So now I have a node at each end, and I can connect up these pipes. So we'll go to the place conduit command to do that. Now, moving forward, I know JD has made some extensive changes to the drainage library, and I don't remember the extent of those changes off the top of my head. I didn't talk to him about that today before I started making my video. So after this video is over, I'm going to let JD chime in to update us on a couple of things here. But the way this currently is set up, using the library that's currently distributed, I've got my feature definitions, and this one is a corrugated plastic pipe. So I'm going to go ahead and pick that feature definition. And then the description allows us to select the size. And I know this has changed, and I'll let JD explain that. So when I pick the start node, on this particular node, there are 4 connection points. And I think he may have changed that just to be 1 point in the center. I'm not sure. He can answer that as well. So I'm going to pick the connection point I want to start from, and then the node connection point that I'm connecting to, and go ahead and place that conduit. And you can see in my 3D view, it's defaulted to the bottom elevation of the drainage structure itself. So that may not be the correct elevation. If I want to change that, I can select the pipe in either the 2D view or the 3D view. And over my properties, I can see a start and stop invert. So I'm going to go ahead and edit those values. Now, sometimes these values might be grayed out, and I think the next one I place, they're going to be grayed out, and I'll show you what you can do to edit them if they're grayed out. But with this one, I'm going to go ahead and change my starting invert to 993. And watch in my 3D view what happens when I enter that value. So it's changed the pipe invert, and unfortunately, the software also moved the node, the bottom of the node, to match that. So there's no way that I'm aware of to turn that off. I think we have a change request in the Bentley to allow turning that behavior off. Okay, so I'm going to go ahead and place these other 2 conduits. So back to the place conduit command, and I'll change my feature definition to a concrete pipe circular, and this one's going to be a 12-inch. And I'm going to connect to one of these nodes. Now, the VBA app that draws these connects to the center. And if JD is using these connection points on the side, I'll probably edit the VBA to use those side connection points rather than the center. If he's going to the center, then I'm going to leave it the way I've got it, and we'll be connecting to the center. So I just need to connect to one of these. So I'll pick that one and come down and pick my PIO node, place that. And let's do one more for the 12-inch CMP. So I'll grab that feature definition. I'll set the size. And let's connect those together. Now I'm going to go back through and look at the elevations on these pipes. So I can pick them again in the plan view or the 3D view, either one. And when I pick this one, I can see the start and stop invert are grayed out. So I don't know what the difference is between the previous one and this one, but if you see it's grayed out and won't let you edit it, what you need to do is go to Utility Properties, click on the little button, and that'll open up the properties for this particular segment. In the Hydraulic Analysis tab, we want to change, there it is, set invert to stop is set to true. We want to change that to false. And that will allow us to edit those inverts. So I'll go ahead and close this. Now I can change this. Maybe that should be at 991.5. Now again, when I change that, if you look over here in the 3D view, you can see it's lowered that from where it was connecting previously. So let's do one more edit. Let me select this one, take a look at its values, and that looks good. I'm just going to leave that alone. Okay, so when I'm done editing and connecting my nodes, the last thing I want to do is go back to the structure itself, or the node for the structure, and I want to change its invert to the surveyed value. So there was a flow line point here that was surveyed. That elevation was 990, so I'm going to change this back to 990. Okay, so there's a few steps to that, and again, at this stage, you need to manually place these by connecting from one node to another, and then go back through and edit those. Now, one thing that was missing in what I was doing is I did not have at hand what these elevations should be based on their dip values from the structure. So the values that I entered were just things I made up off the top of my head. I didn't review my survey data to see what those dip values were and what those elevations should be. So what I'm thinking about doing on the Drainage VBA app, if you store attributes on the structure, I could write a report that would just read the structure, get its attributes, and then report the elevations and everything for each of the pipes that have a P1, P2, P3, 4, and 5 attribute. So if you think that type of report might be useful, just let me know, and I'll look into seeing what I can do to possibly write a report from the fieldbook file. So what about the pipes that were connected using the begin line and end line mapping codes and the various feature definitions for the pipe types? I need to make some 3D utilities for those as well. So I've got a couple options for how I can approach this. Unfortunately, I can't do an extract from graphic and have it read the width of the line style. So there's no way to have it do that to get the proper width. So I could approach this a couple different ways. I'm going to show you two different ways. I'd still need a node at each end, so I'm going to use the place node command, and we're going to place a pipe inlet or outlet existing. So that's under the stormwater group, existing conduit, or pipe inlet or outlet. And I'm just going to do this by picking an element. So it says select the reference element for a node elevation or reset the type and elevation. Well, I'm going to select this 6-inch CPP. You can see the elevation is changing as I move my cursor relative to that element. So what I want to do is just use my snap and snap to the beginning, place that. We'll use absolute rotation and just accept that. And I want to snap to the end and same thing, just accept the rotation. So now I've got a couple of nodes in here. There they are, the two nodes that I can connect up just using our replace conduit command. Now, there's another option I could use. I could use extract from graphics, but there's really no way that we can define these points to extract the points because they're each using a different feature code for the type of pipe. So it uses the survey point cell, but they're all different feature codes. So I can't really isolate that to extract those as nodes. And I can't really use a selection set on the pipe materials themselves because they're all the same level, color, and line style. The only thing that's really different is the width of that line style. So I can use a selection set to select any pipes that are all the same material. So if I had a few of them that were the same material, and I don't know that I do, no, I don't. So I'll just select one of them. So I really need to select my elements first. So I'm going to pick this 15-inch CMP, and then I'll do extract from graphic using the selection method. And I do want to use the elevations. And then I'll pick my feature definition for this. So that's my corrugated metal pipe. My size is 15-inch. So I'll go ahead and data point to accept that one element. It asks me to use the 3D elevations. Yes, we'll accept that. No vertical offset, and no, I'm not creating a trench. So I still need 2 nodes for this to work, and you can see that it's placed a couple of nodes at each end. And these are just Bentley default nodes, and I have not looked into can we change those defaults to something that's more appropriate for just an open pipe. I don't know if JD has looked into that yet or not. So right now that's just using a default. So I think the preferred method would be to place these PIO points and then connect conduit between those. Okay, the last thing we need to take a look at is our box culverts. So I had a few different box culverts that were surveyed, and there's a couple here where I just had some points and they forgot to use the begin line, end line to connect those up, so I don't have an element. And here's one where there were no attributes, so I don't have the width of that culvert drawn in. But I could use any of these points to place my box culvert, and the procedure is going to be the same pretty much for these. So I need a node at each end, so I'm going to start with our place node, and again I'm just going to use the pipe inlet or outlet, and I've got an option here to pick that reference element or to type in an elevation. Well, it won't let me pick the 2D cell as a reference element. So what I'm going to do is type in an elevation. I need to figure out what's the elevation of those points. So since those are surveyed points, I can just use my selection tool, and I can see that one is 1001 and that one is 1000. So just testing data, it's not always going to be that easy to remember the values, but let's go ahead and place some nodes on there. So I use the place node command, and I'll right click to type an elevation, and this one's going to be 1001. So I'll just put it right on that point and accept our rotation, and the second one's going to be 1000, and we'll go ahead and put that on this point and accept the rotation for that. So with 2 nodes, I can go ahead and place a culvert between them. So I'll use the place conduit option, and I have some box culvert options in our feature definitions under storm sewer, existing box culvert. We'll go ahead and place the 12-foot span. So I'll pick my starting node, and then I'll pick my ending node and accept that. And you'll see there's some plan view representation as well as 3D representation for the box culvert. So that's just an overview of the process to draw on a 3D box culvert. Wow, I must have had a lot of caffeine before I did that one. I was zipping through some of that. So I had a couple things in there I meant to get with JD on, and JD, if you're available, could you add little clarification for a couple things? I know we have an update that's you're holding for a future release on the drainage and utilities DGN library, and a couple of things there. Do you want to comment on the selecting the pipe feature and the size of the pipe? That was the first one. Second one was the node connection points. I don't remember if you're continuing to use those points on the node or if you're just using the center of the node. And I think the third was that Bentley default node that was placed at the pipe ends.
Yeah, so I talked about it on back in the February meeting where I showed kind of the changes. I got a slide coming up later for in the recent or the common ORD issues where I'm going to kind of bring it up again. The connection regions I didn't change. I don't plan on changing that. You know, the pseudo properties can still spit out center to center lengths for payment. So I don't plan on changing those because I'd have to go into every single cell and change that unless it's deemed necessary. The sizes, you don't really notice the difference. You still select the sizes the same way, but the way it's pulling the sizes changed, which again, I haven't released it yet, but I'll talk a little bit more about it in the common ORD issues. I got a slide on it. The other setting for the default, like lock to inverts, I can go through and change those. And then I also like to add, this is a lot of information, and I think we all realize it's not the best solution. Most of this stemmed from providing workflows for the survey side, just to make sure that we could show that survey data. I do think this is a stopgap that we will address better functionality later on and improve this workflow.
Okay. What about that default node when I extracted the pipe and it placed that?
Oh.
Have you looked at that? Can we change that? Do you know?
I think we can change it. I do have a dummy node in there that places just a triangle on a, like, I forget what level I put it on. So if it was like an outlet or something, you can just turn that level off and you won't see anything. So I think we should be able to change that default.
Okay. Okay, well, I'm sorry that was a lot longer than I anticipated, but as JD said, there's a lot of information, and when I got into it, I realized it was probably going to go a little long, so my apologies on that. And I have not looked at our chat to see if there's any questions there, so I'll take a look at that if there's anything that popped up that JD hasn't already answered. So I'm going to go ahead and stop sharing, and we can move on to the next person here.
Okay, so level display. So Eric said he was going to go over. Well, I'm going to go over two. So this meeting might go a little past the agenda. So, but hopefully you guys get a lot out of this. Level display has been, I feel like, a pretty big issue lately. I think there's a lot of confusion around it. And we were still a little confused. So I spent probably way more time than I ever cared to figure out how everything was working, because there's a lot going on here and it seemed to be intermittent, and I'm sure you guys who are using ORD are probably seeing some of the same things. So I thought it'd be a good idea to go through and really dive in and tell everyone, here's what I found out, here's how it's working. But so I'll try to go fast because I know I got a lot of content here, but there's multiple ways to control level display. And where we really started seeing these problems is when we're cutting from name boundaries. So that's what this is really going to focus on. But there's saved settings, there's reference display, there's saved views, there's configuration variables, in the profiles you can attach more profile views, and there's different ways to control level display in that regard as well. So first, let's start off with what we're used to, what our standards have always done. The active model is pretty much always controlled level display, and that include reference models. So if you needed to save the way the levels display was, you would go to that file, turn levels on and off, save settings, right? That's what we were used to. When you attach a new model, we were used to just getting the current level display of that model at the time that you attach it, and then then it would be controlled by active model. And then we had that variable defined where if you add a new level on your, like, say your design, and then you go into your sheet file, that new level would not automatically turn on. So that was all the way it's been working. It's what we're used to, but now we're going to start seeing some changes. So what really controlled what we're used to? So it really comes down to when we start diving into these reference settings. So one of them being display overrides. Our default was allow. So the display overrides, when you set it to allow, that basically means allow the overriding of display for nested references. So the keyword is nested. So if you're in a sheet file and you have nested references, that's where this comes into play. It does not affect the direct reference, but allow basically lets you change that level display. And then we also had, for new level display, we set a variable that if you add a new level, like I just described, to make sure it doesn't automatically show up. So if you go to print sheets, you don't see these new levels just randomly showing up. So I will say, I said intermittently not working. I probably should just change that to it's not working with name boundaries. We have a ticket in. It seemed like the new levels are still showing up when you go that route, and it's probably because of saved views, which I'll get into. So when you're not using name boundaries, this is really what you're going to get, the way you're used to getting it. There's a formal description of that I pulled right out of the help manual, which everyone loves to read, for a more detailed explanation on how these things work. But we had it set to allow, and you'll see that we're starting to use never, and I'll explain more as we get into it. But to save time, I'm gonna jump past these. Same thing for the new level display. I pulled that from the help as well. So when do we get what we're used to? I just said when we manually add references, basically not using name boundaries. Okay, so let's get on to the real topic that I think everyone is interested in, is level display with name boundaries. So first off, all name boundaries create saved views. No matter if you're in plan, profile, or cross-section, you might not have realized it, but they all actually create saved views. Saved views is what I'm finding to be the bottleneck in most of the issues that we are seeing. I've talked to Bentley about this. They are working on cleaning this up to kind of make it work more seamlessly. So while they're doing that, here's what I figured out. So before we dive into it, I don't know if you guys have seen this variable or not, but there's a variable, it's do not override design levels in sheet, that Bentley added to their stuff. And so when it's set to 1, it's basically like saying that you want to keep your sheet and drawing models to be the same as your design model, or the model that contains your name boundaries. So that container file that you use to set up that sheet creation through name boundaries, this variable is basically saying make those drawing and sheet models match that. So we do have this on in our workspace. So it is on, when you're using our workspace, it's not set like per project, it is on. I'm going to go through kind of how that affects everything here shortly. But so let's talk about plan view. So anytime you use our drawing seed, so I got this screenshot, you know, as long as you're using one of these seed files that we set up for creating a plan view, name boundary, they are all set so that display overrides is never. So there's one change right off the bat from what I just said, what we're used to. So when it's set to never, that means never allow the overriding of display things. So it controls more than just level display, but we're going to focus in on level display. So basically that means if you make a level display change in your sheet file, or your model rather, or your drawing model, that it's not going to be saved, because this setting is saying don't allow that. And again, I want to reiterate, this is only for nested references, not the direct reference, not, you know, levels you or elements you drew directly in that file, obviously. But I'm going to talk a little bit more about that and about the do not override variable and when it's actually working, because that's where I think people say it's on, but it's not working. And I saw the same thing until I dove into it a little more. Okay, so I kind of reiterate, it's being controlled from the design model. That's what people want to do. You got like 20 plan sheets. You don't want to have to go into 20 sheets just to turn level on and off. You know, you want to be able to control that from the design model and have that push through to, you know, all those plan views. So I'm going to say it probably 100 times here, nested references when we're talking about display override setting on that reference setting. So what if you need to have one sheet different, right? What if one sheet needs to be different from the other 20 that you have? You can go into that reference settings and you can change the display override off of never onto allow or always. Either one will work. And then that'll let you change the level display in that given model. So that might be a little confusing. So why don't we actually show some examples here? So I'm going to run through this video. We'll go over level display for a plan view. So I'm in a file that has, you know, the drawing and sheet models that were generated from a name boundary cut. And so if you look at the references, you'll notice that the display overrides is set to never for both of the references in the sheet model and the drawing model. And so if you're cutting sheets using one of our seed files, the name boundaries, that's how they are set up. And so we did that intentionally so that we can kind of take advantage of what this really is doing. So display overrides never basically means to not allow the overriding of the display. But the thing to remember is that this only affects nested references. All right. So if I take a look at my level display, this container file here, that's my direct reference, which typically you're only going to see, like the name boundary because it's a container file. You're going to reference everything in that you need. So most likely you won't have too much level control needing to be done on the, the direct reference. Everything else is nested, which means the display override setting for that reference is going to take effect. So for example, if I wanted to, I don't know, turn off maybe the ditch, I turn it off, I save settings, and I reload the file, display override is going to say, you're not allowed to do that, and it's going to, turn it back on. Okay, so I reload the file, you see it's back on, even though I save settings. That is solely because of display overrides equal to never. It is not have anything to do with the do not override level, which we'll get into in more detail here. So this can be on or off, and this is going to act the same way. Okay. So to further kind of show that is if I jump over to that container file that contains my name boundaries, and I actually turn off that ditch here, and we'll get to global display in a little bit. So if I turn it off, save settings, and I jump back over to my sheet file, you'll see that it will be off because that display overrides equal never is saying, basically keep in check with that reference file. So now I see that it is off. Okay. So that will be true for all of the sheets that you cut. So if you have like 5 sheets that you cut, you change that level display in that design model, that container file, and that level display will update in all 5 of those sheets, as long as it's a nested reference. If you come across a situation where you have one individual file that you maybe need a different level display than the other ones, then what you can do is you come into the reference and you turn the display override off of never and on to something else like always. So now I'm basically saying allow overrides or always allow those display overrides. So if I come in here and maybe on this one I do want that ditch on, I can come in here, turn it on, save settings. Now if I reload the file, you notice that it stays on. Okay, and again I still have this variable turned on. Do not override. So you notice it's still on, which is where we get some confusion on this, which I'm going to dive deeper into this variable here in the next video. But for right now, this video is going over, the display overrides, and you can see how you can use that to your advantage, and then still see how you can make those one-off changes if needed. One other thing that this display overrides does was when it's set to never, it also controls the display of those nested references, right? So same thing with levels. If I come in and I turn off the display of one of those nested references here, if I reload the file, it will turn back on because it's going to sync back to that design model. So I'd have to go to the design model and turn the display off, and then it would be off for all my drawing models. Okay, so next video I'll dive into this variable and how that's working. Okay, so picking up on this plan view level display stuff, I just kind of showed the display overrides, and then we started to kind of question, what the heck is going on, because this config variable do not override is on. So when you read that description, you think, okay, so it's very similar to display overrides equal never. Make sure that the design model controls the level display of my drawing and my sheet models. But as you saw, I turned off my display overrides to always. So that's now no longer a factor. So if I change the level display in here of that nested reference, and I reloaded, I saw that I turned it on in the drawing model, but it's off in my design model, which is the opposite of what that do not override variable is supposed to be doing. And the reason for that is I guess it doesn't really say, it's not documented, but when you read the description of that variable, but from what I've tested, what I've seen is that variable really only comes into play when you start using global display. So the whole time we've been using view display. So I wanted to kind of quickly show how that's working. So what I would like to do is I'm going to turn off the variable first and then turn it on later and show you how it really is coming into play here. So I'm just going to turn it off. Since it is on in our workspace, we don't recommend changing the workspace config file. So what you could do is inside your work set config file, just set this equal to nothing. Okay. But for this demonstration, I'm just quickly going to comment on and off, a couple times for speed here. All right. So now what I want to do is I want to reload this. So I'm going to pause it and reload. But before I do that, let me just bring this back to never. Get that back in sync. I just like that. Okay, so I reloaded that, and you can see it is no longer defined. And I'm still, display override is still set to always. So we're taking that, out of the question right now. So what I'm gonna do is I'm gonna go back to my, container file, and I'm gonna start changing level display, but I'm gonna do it globally, and we can see how it works with the variable off. So in my level display, global display here. Now I added these couple things right here to start kind of showcasing this because remember the display overrides only affected nested references, so I drew some stuff directly in here to show what happens, with the direct reference. All right, so what I'm gonna do, I am going to, turn all those three off globally here. I'm gonna go into a nested reference, and I'm also going to start turning things off. Now this, we did leave these two off on the view display, but so if I go to global display, maybe I turn off, the shoulder and the ditch right here. So I'm going to save settings. And now I'm going to go back to my plan view. And we start inspecting what happened. Okay, so if we take a look here, you'll see that it didn't, really do much. We had the ditch off before, if you guys remember that, as well as the shoulder, but I turned off the edge pavement globally, but it's still on here. So, the variable's off, right? And I also turned off these levels, and they're still on, right? Which if you look back in the video, you'll see that Scratch 2 was off before I ran that. So you see nothing really changed here, right? So now I'm going to turn that variable back on. Save it. And I'll reload the file here. Okay, so now it's reloaded, and you'll see that these things are turned off, right? So just to prove, that it is on. These levels are off, the shoulder level's off. So if I jump back to my container, so you know, the one difference I see right now is the shoulder, right? So I think I had that off in the view before, the view display. So let me make sure. Let me go back here and check something real fast. So if I go to my view display, I want to turn that on. This is where you see you can get a little complicated, but the view this variable is only controlling global display, but I already had it turned off by the view display, which this variable wasn't controlling. So if I save settings and reload the file, so maybe this was a good example to show. It's staying on now. So it does get a little tricky there, but if you stick to the global display for your stuff, then you won't run into that. Oh, well, I turned it off for view display before. So now if I go to view display and I come in here and I turn off that shoulder, save settings, and I'll reload. You'll see it stays off, right? So that's where this confusion or about that variable is coming into play here. If I control it view display, then I can do these like one-off. I need it to be different. But if I need it to be the same across all like 5 sheets, the global display comes into play here. So it actually is, it is working. So I just took a little bit of tinkering around to really figure out how it's working. So hopefully, this is beneficial to you guys, and you guys are seeing how this is working, and I didn't confuse you guys more. So global display. Now, only other thing I wanted to mention here is, if I start turning things, to be different globally in this view here, if I reload my file, those things should turn back off because that variable is going to sync back to the drawing model or the design model. Sorry. So you see that did work here. Okay. So that do not override variable really is coming into play with the global display. But don't forget about the nest override or display overrides. That only affects the nested references, but it pretty much was doing what we needed to do, and you can easily turn it off if you need to do something. But this turning on to never is going to work with the view display. So if you have this on, you wanted to try to make that one-off view change that I just showed with this, it's not going to work because then the display overrides is going to kick in again. So look what I just did before with it on always, you saw that retained, but if I turn that back on and I reload the file, it should come back on. So I think I got a little unclear there. Hopefully, you guys can rewatch this video, and if I lost you, but that is how it's working for plan view stuff. So let's recap that to hopefully clarify any confusion that might still be left. So what we really want to know at the end of the day is, when does our drawing model stay in sync with the design model, and when does it not? Okay, so display overrides, we know if that's set to never, my nested references, that level display will always be the same as my nested references in my design model. I think that's pretty easy to understand. And then we also can very easily have one drawing model be different from the others by just going into that specific one and turning the display overrides, to all out or always. So that easily allows us to have, maybe we have one sheet that needs a different level display. That easily allows us to do it. Okay, but it's only with nested references. So now, let's bring in the do not override variable, right? So the key to remember that is it's globally controlled globally. But it also includes the direct reference. So if I go to my design model and I turn things off globally, when I come into here, my drawing models, all of them will be off globally as well. And the caveat here is there's no way to override that like there is with display overrides. That is all or nothing kind of thing. You can't have one drawing model be different from the other ones because that variable is controlled, for the entire, configuration. You can't turn it off per file, per model. But there is one caveat to this. So I can't, individually control turning on a level, but I can individually control turning off a level. And that's what I was trying to show with that shoulder. Basically because, the global display is technically on for a level like shoulder. But if I come into the view display in a given individual drawing model, I can turn that off, save settings, and the view display will hold. But I can't do the opposite because you see, once the global display turns it off, I can't turn it on in the view display. So hopefully I didn't confuse you guys. Okay, so I know that was a lot. Hopefully that last recap cleared it up a little bit. It does work. Just that weird difference between global and view display. So moving on, there's some other things, and when I get to profile, you'll see hopefully some more clarification as I get through this because a lot of it works the same way, but each one's slightly different. I also want to mention that there is a VBA that Bentley has out there. It's the level display batch processor. It just should note that if you have this variable set to 1, the app won't work because, well, that variable is going to override it. So the app will tell you, hey, you got this set. You really don't need to be using this app. It is not integrated with ProjectWise. So that's another thing to keep in mind, as well as the display overrides setting it to never takes priority over this VBA. But it doesn't warn you unless you set it as a config variable. But as you see, we can easily set those differently per individual reference. So it doesn't check that per reference, so it'll act like it's working. But if your display overrides never, well, then it's not really going to work because the display override is going to take priority over it. So I think we're going to add this into our standards, but I wanted to make sure I outline those kind of caveats there if you go to use this. I think I have a video that briefly shows that. Okay, so going over some other ways to control level display. One of those is save views. So if you didn't know, anytime you use the name boundaries to cut your sheets, the drawing model is actually using a saved view, or it's created from a saved view. So what that means is I can actually just come into my container file, because that's where the saved views are, open up my saved views, and I should see one for any basically drawing boundary that I have. So I can click on that, I can look at the properties, I can come in and I can edit the level display for that save view for any of these references or nested references or the main reference. I can turn the display off or on if I wanted to. So maybe I turn off my survey, and then I'll just come down here and I will turn off the shoulder. All right. So now if I jump back over to my drawing model for this plan 1 sheet, what you'll notice is that I don't immediately see that change. So there, everything still looks looks the same, like if I didn't even modify the save view. So now what I have to do to see that is I have to come to my attached tools, my references, and I have to right click and update from saved view. Because when I do that, you see it updates. But display overrides takes precedence over the save view. So since I have this set to never, if I reload the file, it's going to turn those levels back on. So you see the levels are back on. So if you're trying to use those save views, you will have to turn off the display overrides to, well, at least turn it off and never and on to something else. So if I do that and I update from save view again, save settings, and now I reload the file, they will stay off. So I wanted to also point out that I still have that do not override config variable on. So you'll notice that that is not a factor here. So really it's just the display overrides that is going to take precedence. All right, so that's how save views is working. Now, I do want to mention, I haven't had time to dive into the reasoning. I'm sure there's a reasoning for it, but I mentioned earlier that our new level display, in the settings right here is basically set up so that it doesn't automatically show new levels when you add that to like your design model or one of those references. But it looks like that's not working. I think it's because it's a save view, so just watch out for that as you add new levels in, or draw in things on levels that haven't been used before. They are kind of automatically turning on, from what I've noticed. So just be conscious of that. I gotta take some more time and dive into why I think it's a save view. Now there is one other thing I wanted to quickly talk about, and that is a VBA that Bentley has released to help with level control. But you'll notice when I try to run this, it doesn't work if you have that do not override variables or variable set. So I'm going to load this VBA that Bentley has put out there, and you notice that it says the configuration variable set, so this macro won't work. So let me reload the file and turn that off. Okay, so now that variable's off, I'll run that. And now it does open for me. Another thing to note is display overrides trumps this as well. So that takes precedence over this application, but they only check to see if it's defined in the configuration variable. It doesn't check each individual reference, which, as you know, you can change that setting per reference. So if that is set to never and you try to use this, it's not going to work, obviously. So the way it works is you can set up your level display for either sheet file or sheet model or a drawing model. Now make sure you only use this on things that were generated from name boundaries. But you set up your active model, whether it be a drawing or sheet, with the level display that you want. And then you can tell it to process, and it'll go through the rest of the like models. So if you edit a drawing model, it's only going to go through the other drawing models. It won't affect the sheet model. And same vice versa. If you're in the sheet model, it'll only update other sheet models. So you can process just the active file. You can include like filters, like in case you have multiple, name boundaries and cut different times for different things, and you only want to control level displays for certain things. You can use these filters so it only touches those models. You can toggle the reference attachment display on or off. And for the cases where you're cutting to separate files, like we are doing, you can add those files in, or you can add a folder in, and it'll process all those files as well. There's a video out there. I'll link it. I won't really go through it too much because, you know, the override variable and the display overrides reference setting take precedence over it. Okay, so see, I'm running kind of long already. So let's go over some profile stuff, and at the end, I have recommendations, hopefully maybe to clear up some confusion still. But first off, with profiles, there's a bug filed with Bentley. Anytime you open the profile view window, you'll notice that like the reference levels are turned off. So we've tracked it down to the reasoning being because of the level display variable, a new level display variable. I think I gotta double check. I'm pretty sure it's scheduled to be fixed in the next release, hopefully. But yeah, so I have this, you know, just repeating video here that shows like when I open that new view up, you'll see the reference levels are not on, and I just have to go and turn those on. So it's just anytime you kind of open that new window, after it's open, you know, save settings, reopen the file, it'll stay on. But so I want to make sure everyone's aware of that. So profiles set up in a very similar manner. So as long as you're using one of our seed files for profiles, they're set up in a similar manner where the display overrides is set to never. Okay. And this one also, I'll talk about the do not override level as well, and having to use global display. So let's get into this. Some other things you can do with profiles is you can attach all profile views, which I'll go over in the video. And that to control auto display is going to be globally, as well as when you add a 3D cut. But to control level display with that, you need to have 2020 release 2 of ORD, and you need to hit that refresh 3D cut button to actually apply those, which I'll show in the video here. So let's take a look at our level display for profile view. So I've made a container file that I added a bunch of references to, and you'll see that I do have the do not override variable on right now. And I've also already cut to my profile sheets. So if we go take a look at those, you can see that they already have the display overrides set to never, just like in the plan view. So if I try to turn something off here, like ground line or something, save settings, if I reload the file, the display overrides is going to bring it back, right? So it should be back on. And I can, I'll pause the video, turn the variable off, and do that again to show that the variable isn't controlling that either. So you see I reloaded and the variable's off. And now if I come to my level display and I turn off that ground line again, I save settings and I reload, it should be back on. So display overrides is controlling that. All right. So now what I want to do is jump back to my container file. And I want to start adding in references and things and start really showing how this is working. I will say that I have been running into some inconsistencies, or I haven't been able to track it down just yet. But what I found is that I consistently get the level display to work when I cut my sheets before I do a 3D cut or attaching all profile views. When I attach the profile views or do a 3D cut and then I cut my sheets, I've had sporadic results. It's always around these two levels, basically never being able to stay on. So if you guys run into that situation, I recommend you go back and basically redo your container file, cut your sheets before you start doing these 3D cuts. But it's not happening to me every time, so I know there's some stuff in the way it's causing it. I just didn't have time to track it down before this meeting. So I'm going to add a 3D cut here. And we can control the 3D cut level display. You have to have ORD 2020 release 2, and it doesn't work in release 1. And the way you control it is you go to the level display, which after I added that 3D cut, you see it added more of these references. But let's say I don't want to see any of those pavement buildups, so I'll turn them all off. And you notice that it doesn't immediately update the view. Since this is within the 3D cut, you have to come in here and hit refresh 3D cut. And when I hit that, you see the levels then just turned off. So that's how you control levels display within a 3D cut. Now you also can do this attach all profile views, and where this comes in handy is, maybe like you have a bridge stuff and you need more stuff shown on the profile just for the bridges. So you wouldn't really want to draw that in your geometry file because anytime you look at the reference of this main geometry out of your BK file, you'd always get that bridge stuff, right? So you would create a bridge file referenced in your geometry, and then within the bridge file, you would add stuff to, your profile. So when you hit attach all profile views, it basically looks at all the attachments that you have on your design model, and it goes and looks to see if there's stuff drawn on the profile, and it will attach it. So in this example, I've created a utility file. In that utility file, I've drawn in some just dumb graphics here, and so when I hit attach all profile views, it'll see that I have the utility file attached, and then it attached that reference to that profile view within that utility file. Now, this is just for demo purposes. You probably want to draw utilities in using drainage and utility features because this is just a dumb graphic, but this is to show the point here. Now, the other thing I want to do is I want to draw in some stuff on Scratch just to have it directly in this so it won't be nested. So if I come into my drawing and just place a line on Scratch and a line on Scratch 2. Okay. So now let me jump over to my profile sheet, and all those levels are on now. Okay. So now, what if I want to control the level display? So this is where it's a little different from the plan view. So in the plan view, when we were using the display overrides set to never, we were just going to our container file and just turning the level off. But if I start changing level display in here, like maybe turning off the ground line or something, if I save settings, let's turn off electrical too. If I save settings and I go back to my drawing model, one would expect display override set to never to turn those off. But as you see, that didn't happen. So what you have to do is you have to use global display when you're within this profile view here. I think it has something to do with this not being like an exact real model, whereas your plan view was a real model. This is, like within the geometry. So I think that is why view display isn't working with the override set to never. So I'll turn these back on in the view. And then I'll change myself to global display. And I'll turn off the ground line and then turn off electrical save settings. And now I'll jump over to that drawing model. And now you see those levels updated. And keep in mind, I do have the config variable still off for do not override. Let me verify that for you guys. You see it's still undefined. So it truly, it's the nest, the display overrides is what's controlling this. Just like the plan view, you can come in here and if you need, one sheet to be different from, or one drawing model to be different from maybe the other 5 that you cut, you just like plan view, you can come in here and switch it off with never. And now you can start controlling your level display within this drawing model. So say I turn off maybe the gas line now. If I save settings and all right, reload this file. You see it stays off. So that functionality is still working. The main difference here is the global display on your view model and your design or your container file. Okay, so what we haven't talked about is what happens when we turn the variable on. So when we turn the variable on, we get the same effect we did in plan view, where it'll start also controlling your direct references. Because remember that this display override is only affecting the nested references. So let me turn that back on and I'll quickly show that. So I have turned the variable back on. And now I'm going to jump back over to my container file. And if I go to my level display and I turn off, maybe scratch 1, save settings, go over to my drawing model. That level is off. See, scratch 1 is globally off. So the same goes with plan view. So even though I have that variable on, if I come here and turn off like the scratch 2 variable, if I reload the file, that'll still stay off. And that has the same exact thing with plan view where the global display is controlling that variable. So if you turn it off in the view display, then your view display is taking it over, just like plan view. So that's still working the same way. I can easily come back in here, turn my display overrides back to never, and then I get that back on. So hopefully that clarifies things. So to recap, you have to use global display for the nest overrides to work, as well as for the variable to work. And if you're going to do anything within the 3D cut, you have to make sure you hit the refresh 3D cut button to make sure that comes through. Your profile drawing models also start off with the save view, just like your plan view, but it is slightly different. So if I take a look at my saved views, I'll notice that when I go to control the level display, I only see, one of the nested references. So all the references from the 3D cut and the attach all profile views are not showing up here. So it's not really a great way to control level display if you can only get one piece of it. But what I did is I turned off the proposed grade line for my save view, but then over on my global display, I turned off the ground line globally, but in my save view, that existing ground line is on. So if I jump over to my profile view or drawing model, and I update from save view, you'll see the proposed view turned off, which is what the save view told us to do. But you notice that the ground line is off. So that says that the global display is trumping the save view. And just as in plan view, display override set to never trumps the save view as well. So if I reload this file, all those are going to come back on because display override is set to never, right? So honestly, global display and profile views is really the way to go here to control levels. It pretty much does everything. And then if you need to make a one-off change, just switch your display override off to never to something else, and you should hopefully have success in controlling your level displays for profiles. You can also use that level display application or VBA that Bentley released that I showed back on the plan view slides with your profile view display. It has the same limitations or restrictions. Display override set to never is still going to override whatever that application is doing, as well as it's not integrated ProjectWise, as well as it doesn't work if you have the do not override variable display are turned on. So that is still available. Just note the restrictions on that. Okay, so talking about cross sections, which I think this is the most obvious one that we knew at use save views. We're going to use global display to control that. I will say that the do not override variable isn't relevant for the drawing model. Display overrides is going to be irrelevant for the drawing model. That level display VBA that I showed earlier is not going to work for this either, but there is a different VBA level state updater that I'll show too. So let's get into it. Okay, let's go over level display for cross sections now. So I'm in my sheet file that I generated from name boundaries. And you look at my sheet model, if you look at the references, display overrides is set to never, just like plan and profile. And that's going to work the same way for all three of those types, where if it's set to never, it's going to match the drawing model. So that's where, that's still working the same way. If I go over to the drawing model and I take a look, display override is still set to never, but it's not really doing anything. And that's because if I come over to my level display, I start looking at any of the references, they're all grayed out. And when you hover over them, it'll tell you level state is controlled by save view. Now it'll tell you if the level is on, like level is on in active view. So, but you can't control it here. So there's no way to override the level display. So display overrides, therefore, isn't really doing much. So how do you control level display then? So you do that through save views. So what I'm gonna do is I'm gonna jump over to the file that contains my name boundaries. I'm gonna take a look at my save views. So there's a save view for each of those cross sections. If I click on one, I can easily go to a given reference and turn the display something on or off. So maybe I turn off the storm sewer. If I jump back to my sheet file, you should see that is turned off, which it is. It's turned off. Okay, so that is how you can control level display, per cross section. But there are ways to do that more efficiently, like to update all of them, all of your cross sections with the same level display. So the first way to do that is you can use global display on your 3D model. So I'm in my 3D model. You can see there's those name boundaries. If I use global display, so here, let me do this. Let me turn off, or let me turn back on my save view. And turn that back on. Save it. So now if I go over to my global display in my 3D model, if I turn off here, I'm turning it off for all my name boundaries. So maybe I also just come here and just turn off all these so you can see. So I save settings. Now if I jump back to any of those cross-section files, you'll see that these levels should be off. And a quick look, it does look like they're off. I can see annotation, but the levels I turned off, they're all off, and I can easily go to another container file here just to show you that they'll be off in those files as well. You can see they're off there. So if I go back to my container, the thing to remember is that global display, once you turn it off globally, it's trumping your save view. So my save view for that stuff, has them turned on, right? But like global display has them turned off, so globally is taking priority over, your save views. So keep that in mind. There is one additional way you can control level display, but first let me just turn all these back on, as well as let me turn on that storm line. Okay. So the last way you can is through VBA Bentley released. We have added this to our workspace. So we'll be adding that other one for plan and profiles most likely here in the near future. But there's one called Level State Updater. So we tweaked it a tad bit from what Bentley released, but it's just a way to help update the save views that I just showed updating manually. So you can click on all of your saved views or just the certain ones you want to update, and then you check on levels that you either want to turn on or off. So if I need to turn maybe off the drainage one as the example I keep using, I can go to DR proposed storm sewer, I check that on, I say, what, I want to turn that off. And so it'll turn, once I hit apply, I'll turn it off for any of the save views that I have selected. So you do have to be in your file that has your name boundaries in order for the application to pick up the save views and be able to update it. So now that I did that, if I take a look at my save view, we should see that that level is off again. So that is how you can control your cross-section level display. Okay, so I know that was a lot of stuff here, so I thought I'd put together a couple slides for what I think is going to be the easiest way to control this stuff. So I think first off, I think the display overrides equal never is probably the best way to go with everything. So I think you should leave that to never. But for so talking about plan view, typically you're not drawing anything directly in that container file. So the display overrides never is going to literally control all of it because you don't have any direct references. Now, if you do need that one-off change, or maybe one given drawing model, you need to have different level display than for that one given one, turn it off of never and on to always. Okay. So I skipped ahead of that first bullet note. So I'm saying for sheet models, I think leave the sheet models alone. Don't try to control level display in the sheet model, right? Leave those to never, and let those control everything from the drawing or the design depending on the situation. So I don't recommend touching that one, and that's
more just unless you have something drawn directly in it. So now when it comes to the direct references for plan view, use global display on the direct references in your design model. And then that'll, as you saw from the video, that global display will control that level display. If you need those to be different, the direct references to be different, your only choice is to turn off that variable by going into that given work set config file and setting it equal to nothing. Now there is that one little caveat where I showed where you could still turn things off that were on globally, but you can't turn things on that are off globally. That's the one change you can make off of that variable. Hopefully that made sense what I said. Pretty much plan view, use display override, set to never until you need that one-off change, and then use global display for those direct references. For profile, you pretty much have to use global display for everything, as you saw. But again, use that display override just like in plan view. But if you need one to be different, switch it off of it. The display of direct references is different across drawing models. You can turn them off in the drawing model, but you need to turn that variable off again. So again, when you're dealing with direct references, if you need one to be different than the other, your only choice is to turn that variable off. Hopefully you don't have to go into there. But I keep saying that, but there is that one caveat where you can still turn levels off. So you just can't turn them back on. Cross sections. Use global display. So here's a theme here, which I forgot to update that slide because it says profile model. So my bad there, but this one's a little more simpler because you can't really do anything in the drawing model, right? They're all grayed out, so you can't really do anything. So it's simpler in that aspect. So if you need to control it across the board, use global display. But the second you need them differently, you're going to have to edit each individual saved view, and there's that VBA available. But keep in mind, if you turn it off globally, that trumps your saved view. So if you need something to be different per given one, you can't have it turned off globally, or you won't be able to turn it on for that one given one, if that makes sense. So I really hope that helped clarify some things. It made sense in my head, but after seeing these videos, I think there might still be some confusion. So feel free to reach out. I think when you get into that actual situation of using it, that's where you really start making sense. Okay, this is how it's working. But I do think the display overrides is your best bet to go. Equal and never. That way you can control them in your, which I think consultants, you guys are probably using that even in SS4. So, I know we are over time here. I don't know if there's been any questions popping in here.
Hey, JD, this is Eric.
Yeah.
So I'm not sure what happened, but when you came out of that last video, your audio is very low and penny sounding.
Oh, is that better?
I guess that's all it was.
Much better. Yeah.
I moved my. I took a drink of water. I didn't. Okay, my bad. So hopefully you guys can make out what I was saying on my recommendations. Trying to look at the chat real fast. So some comments about it's been almost 2 years. Yeah, yes, I know loves display. Can't hear JD anymore. Hopefully that's just a delay in time, since we are a little behind for you guys. I know it's been level display has been an issue, but I think hopefully what I showed today, it clears things up. You have a couple more options, but if you need to control it from your design model, that display overrides is going to handle most of it, and then your global display with that variable is going to come in for the rest of this thing for those direct references. But But yeah, so if you guys run into more problems or have more questions on it, you feel free to reach out, and I can try to help explain it. Maybe we'll put together some videos to be a little more clear on what it can and can't do. But I'm going to move on since I know we are behind schedule here. So the next topic is common ORD issues or service requests that we've seen come in. So Matt and I are going to kind of go over some of these. So we just pulled out a couple things. So there's an overview list, but since we're a long time, we'll just skip on to the next one. So first thing, compatibility issues with ORD. I talked about it last time. I want to make sure I reiterate this. When the second number in the ORD version changes, that is when there's a compatibility issue. So you have to watch out for this. So the second you open a file that contains civil data in a newer version, that second number, someone with the older version won't be able to edit that file. Right? It's gonna give them a warning saying it's been updated to have newer data or whatever it says. So it's not a problem looking at the older files. It's a problem someone with an older version looking at the newer ones. And the same goes for our standards. So if we update the standards with a newer one and you're running an older one, you're going to run into issues. That is why we have the sync tool, and that's why we added the version control to our sync tool. So that if you guys haven't updated yet, you can still get our other updates, but the version control will make sure the files that were updated in the newer one you don't get. So it keeps your standards in check with what version you want it to. The version control dropdown will only update with I guess versions when the number changes. So like we have ORD release 2020 release 1 and ORD 2020 release 2. You notice there is nothing in the version control for ORD 2020 release 2. There was no compatibility issue between the two, so there's really no point to have that as an option. So some of you guys were looking for that. That's why it's not there. So I want to make sure everyone has that under control, or at least understands it is a little sticky trying to control it all. I think the real only solution to fix the problem is for everyone to upgrade. The second someone touches that file, everyone else now is going to have trouble. So I know when you're dealing with other DOTs, that gets complicated. So I talk to the DOTs. We all want to make sure that we do our fair share of testing before we say it's okay to use. But ultimately, like, we can't just stay on the old version because we're going to be messing up other people up. So within reason, I think hopefully we all can come together and the DOTs can move within reason, not take so long and make it so hard on you guys. So we're trying. I know it's a problem. The sync tool is there to hopefully alleviate some of that problem, but we're dealing with it as best we can. All right, title sheet map. I've gotten a lot of requests in on this, and I thought I'd bring it up again. I think we talked about it a couple meetings ago. There's a bug. I just haven't gotten around to fixing it. If you're using this, you type in the PID, and the location comes up as a single point location, so not like a line segment, maybe like a bridge or something. If you select just one single point and hit generate map, it's going to crash. Problem being is what the location is just one point. It tries to like zoom. It can't zoom in that far to fit the extents of the map, and so it doesn't know what to do and crashes. So in the meantime, until I fix this, just bump your buffer value up to like 200 or more. That way, it can actually generate the map and won't crash. I've also had lots of complaints about people not liking this app, and I hear you. This was, we talked about this. We have a problem with the DGN county files, county DGN files with all the line segments that were in it that we've been using forever. We haven't updated that in over a decade. And we haven't really looked into how to update those. That was kind of a lost process from before my time. I'm not saying it's not possible, but we haven't looked at it. So when I went to connect, I said, let's see if we can come up with a solution that isn't so intensive on us to maintain all these CAD files and update them. And so I went the JS route and I just pulled in locations and generated a map. So we are looking at maybe going back to the county DGen files and updating them. I know probably people who do detours or things like that, or even like like resurfacing plans. I know those are used heavily for those kind of things. So you can still use them. They're not in this standard. You can go to the OhioDOT CADD standard and get them. They're in the county maps folder. They're just a DGen per county. As a stopgap, just note that they haven't been updated in a decade. But if you need to use them, you can go grab them and get your work going. So I had some more plans with generating KMLs and things like that, which you can still generate the KML. It's just you can't control the color right now. So there might be some avenue to keep this, but I know people don't like it. They say they don't like the look of the map, but I'm looking at my available options. If I can't update those DGen files, what else can I do? So that is where that is at. See, I know it's not perfect. So there's the slide I probably should have gone to earlier. So if you guys have ideas, I welcome them. And if you guys have a better idea how to maybe handle this title map, let me know. And we can look into providing a better solution. Redundant references. I actually have gotten this a couple times now. I thought I'd bring it up here. This is a bug that I have submitted to Bentley. I haven't gotten them to actually file a defect for it yet. So right now it's just in the service request state. So I got to follow up on that. But there's a problem with redundant references. And so I have a screenshot of my design model and then my drawing model after I cut from name boundaries. And what I want to point out here is if you look at the design model and you look inside this BK, it's only showing the 3D file, right? If I go over to my drawing model, it's showing the FB file, but the FB file is also up here. So there is a variable that's on by default that says remove redundant references. It's even if you don't set it, that's the default. So it's working in the design model to remove that redundant reference, but for some reason, when you go to the drawing model, it's not removing that redundant reference. So since our display override is set to never, the level display for this FB file is being controlled in the design model, but the design model knows not to show it, so there's no way to control it. So a lot of times people see these extra levels on, and they don't know how to turn it off because when they go to the design model, it's not there. So look out for that. Just be conscious of your nested references. This problem goes away if you don't go crazy on your nesting. So hopefully they get that file as a defect and can clean that up, but it's not that hard to fix. Just change your nest references so that you don't have it. But if you guys run into that, there's that. Coordinate systems. We have a video here when we send this PowerPoint out. It's on our wiki page. It goes over coordinate systems, but we've been getting questions on it. So the GCS, or the geographic coordinate system, is assigned to the design seed files when you create that file or project. So there's 4 seed files that get added. They're right here. The 2D and 3D design file get the coordinate system from whatever was set when you created that project. So you have north zone, south zone, or none. All your files generated for that project come from these seed files. So if those aren't set correctly, then all of the files you create are now also not set correctly. So if you're doing something with a custom coordinate system that has to be a scale factor, you want to make sure that your survey people or whoever's going to do that custom, figure out that custom scale factor, you want to make sure that they add that to the design seed files before you start generating all your design files. Now, typically, workflow-wise, you're not really going to create one of these design base maps until you have survey because you can't do much until you get the survey files. So I'm hoping that people don't run into this, but I just want to make that clear. You don't want to just start your project and just willy-nilly start creating all your files before you even are ready to start design, because you could run into that issue where those files don't even have the right coordinate system for that project set. We are not setting it on the drawing and seed files, just a side note. You totally can. So surveyors out there, if you're doing this, we say do it to the design. You don't have to do it to the drawing and seed, but if you want to be consistent with all the seed files being named the same, go for it. Doesn't hurt. So real quick on those custom coordinate systems, they're defined within a DTY file. So the DTY file is within the work set standards of a given work set. So when you open up your geographic coordinate system dialog, it should just be there automatically if everything's configured right. So you see your project folder, and then you see a custom one in there. And for the surveyors, all you have to do is come here, edit coordinate systems. You don't longer need Bentley map or anything like that from SS4 days. And the two parameters that we set to 1 are your indicator. Those are the ones where you put the scale factor in. I want to make sure that everyone is clear that this scale factor is the scale factor from grid to ground, not ground to grid. So if you don't know what that means, don't mess with this. Leave it to the surveyors. So just because you see how to do something, make sure you understand what you're doing, because you put it in the inverse of that, then everything's going to be off. But that is how you do it. You just basically edit the values, and then you select that, hit OK. I cut it off in the screenshot, and now that model has that coordinate system defined. Drainage and utilities, I said I was going to bring it up. So I first want to just formally apologize to everybody. I know I showed this back in February, and I said I got to clean some stuff up and I'll release it. And here we are in September, and I haven't released it yet. So that is definitely on me. Every time I tried to go and finish it off, other things kept coming up. So it's no excuse. It should have been out by now. So I am getting back to just getting this out. I will say we have those monthly webinars Mark mentioned in the beginning. We have those. We have one scheduled on November 17th, and it's on SUDA. So I will say that I absolutely have to have it done by then. I hope to get it done before then, but for those of you guys who have been waiting since February, there's no way I can do the webinar in November if I don't have it done, right? So that's kind of like my forced date I have to hit, but hopefully we'll hit it before then. One thing I want to mention, like I mentioned back in February, is these new DGN libs. I had to remake them from scratch to deal with some changes. But with the remake, I'm going to cause compatibility issues with anyone who's already started using the drainage and utility stuff. So Eric showed creating that utility model when he was laying out a drainage node, and you hit yes. If you've done that on your project, when I push this new DGN lib, it's going to mess up your project. And I hate to do it, but moving forward, it's really better. But I'm not going to leave you guys out there to dry, okay? It's going to be very easy to keep those current projects working. And so I've already added this back in February. We released an update to the template. So this is a screenshot of the work set config file, the template. So every time you created a new work set, after February something, whenever I released it, this was actually added and it's commented out. The hashtag means it's not going to read that. If it was created before that, you'll have to add this. But all you have to do on those existing projects that you've already started pseudo work on, you just have to come into this config file and just get rid of that hashtag, and then you'll be fine for that given project. So I know that sounds very scary and worrisome. I promise you I'm not leaving you guys hang out to dry, but whenever I do push that DGN lib out, your existing projects will have to set this variable to keep using the old one. I made it as easy as I possibly could as one line. I've already injected it into the standards, so hopefully a lot of the projects you've created already have it in there, so all you have to do is go in there and comment it out or uncomment it. But you guys feel free to reach out to me if you have more questions on this. I'll blast an email out through DRC list when I do go to push this DGen limit out, reminding everyone that this is happening. We pretty much have historically never really introduced compatibility issues with our standards. We've created new standards, but we never broke it. So I just wanted to just make sure it's clear for everyone to know. So I'll stop reiterating myself here. So look for that in the future. And if you have more questions, feel free to reach out to me. So I'll leave it at that. I think Matt's going to take on the rest of them. Matt, do you want to share your screen or you want me to just keep going? And you can talk.
Just keep going.
Okay.
Advance the slides for me. So I debated on how much detail to show on these next couple issues, and it seemed like less would be better. Got a little confusing on what I was trying to show. So, and given our time here, might be a good. So anyways, the first one I'm going to talk about is right away on cross sections. The issue is that right away is not being shown on the cross sections. It seems to be in some cases that if the active profile was assigned to an element before it had a feature definition assigned to it, the right of way would not appear in the cross section. So next slide, please, JD. The solution is to ensure that the right of way elements have a feature definition assigned prior to setting the profile active for each of those elements. So if you've already profiled those elements, if you just delete the 3D profile element, reassign the feature definition in plan view, and then reassign the active profile, that should take care of it. And we have that workflow defined in the 600 right-of-way training guide. So there's a link to that as well. So if you're unsure of the process, please review that. And then next slide is just a screenshot of the what you might see. The right-of-way lines on the top, both existing and proposed. Those had active profiles assigned to them, but no feature definitions assigned to them. And then on the bottom, they had feature definitions and active profiles. And you can see this is a screenshot of the 3D view. And you can see that the right-of-way, the line styles appear a little differently when they're featureized and have the profiles versus no feature definition assigned to it. So that could be a quick way to maybe identify an issue there. So hopefully that's pretty straightforward. On the next slide there. This one is a little bit more confusing. If you add a new 3D reference to your cross-section container file, it's not displaying. So try and catch up on my thought here. So if when you add that and the container file is display override set to never, the reference attachment in the reference dialog is shown, but the display is turned off. So if you go through the reference dialog hierarchy and you expand it down, you'll see that it's listed there, but the display is toggled off. So you can turn that on or off in your sheet or your drawing models, but that is not retained after the file is closed. So next slide, please, JD. So the solution here is, no one really wants to do this, but recutting all the sheets with the necessary references attached first. The downside, obviously, is you'll lose any work that you did in your drawing or sheet model. The other thing I found that seems to work, but I got really inconsistent results, was to change the attachment display override to always, and then turn that display on. But that wouldn't be done in every section and every sheet, so that's probably not a workflow you want to do either. But and once you do that, any changes to that container file won't be reflected. So, as I said, the results there have been inconsistent in the testing that I've done. If you've found, or maybe you've seen this or found a better way to go about it, please let us know. Maybe we can work together and come up with a better solution. So far, we've filed a defect with Bentley, and there's the number if you wish to follow along with that one. So that's all I got.
Okay, so I know we're gonna go over time here, so apologize. There's a lot of stuff we're showing here. So the last topic is ProjectWise, but more specifically, it's all going to be about working inside and outside of our data source. So this is going to be informative for both internal and externals to see really what options you have available and how to really go about setting it up and using this kind of stuff. So first thing I want to mention is there are basically 3 ways to access our content inside our ProjectWise data source. Okay. The first one is what we're typically used to is through ProjectWise Explorer. So you have a desktop application installed, and that can interact with the data source. So that takes a Visa license. Second way is through the connected project that connects to the data source. That one that's all web-based. It only takes a passport license. The third way is a ProjectWise web view, which is a free read-only, download-only option. So it's a way to kind of look at the files and download them, and it doesn't cost anything. So those are the 3 ways to access. All 3 ways do require permissions to be set up on the data source. So our data source is not an open-ended sling where I can just send the link to anyone and they can just see it. It is a secure environment. So there is going to be some setup so that we can get a consultant to have access and to see or interact directly through one of those 3 ways. So I do want to mention that, and I'm going to talk about how that works, what we've set up, how we've streamlined this process as best we could. But it's going to hone in around that Create Worksite application that everyone knows about, hopefully. So first, real quick, the web view. Oh, I meant to delete that screenshot. Hold on. Shoot, delete that out. Okay, so didn't mean to leave that extra screenshot there. So first, it's free, it's web-based, but you do need access to our data source. So this is the web view, ProjectWise web view. How do you get to it? You can get to ProjectWise web view just through connect.bentley.com. You scroll down to the bottom, you'll see a tile. It says ProjectWise web view. You click on it, and it'll take you to a page like this. If you guys are not ProjectWise users, you most likely won't have any data source connections. Okay, so a connection, that's how you add a connection to someone's data source. So once you have a connection, you can navigate a tree. So I just took a screenshot, and you can go into, given project, row database stamps. You can see, you can link and download. So you can, as long as that person has access and the data source connection set up, you can send them a link and it'll work, right? So if you need, oh, look at that, I added some stuff. So link and downloaded. So for people who need the connection set up, there's the syntax. After you type this in, to get data source, you have the 3 data source options that show up. I think it checks your permission. I don't think you'll see it until you get permission, if I recall right. So I'm going to show in the next step, how we're going to handle permission setup here. But you only have to do this one time, and I'm pretty sure you can do it at the administrator level. So if you guys have someone managing this stuff, I'm pretty sure they can set the data source up for your entire office. So keep that in mind. But you can do it a one-off, manually add a new connection. Okay, so after you add that connection and you get access to our data source, now you can navigate to anything that you have access to. So it's actually a really nice way to get to the source files. So keep that in mind. We're not copying something, putting it to FTP site somewhere else. This is the actual source file that you can get to. There's no copies of it. That's the benefit of ProjectWise. So that might be a good way to get data from us. So the other way, through the connected project. So this, you'll have to be invited to that connected project, and you also still have to have access added to the data source to see anything. So this gives you more ability for edited access. The first way obviously is completely read only. It's just a download. So within the share or connected project, you can be read only, or you could be edit access. You can actually get in and start adding files directly through the connected project. So this is not geared to showing how to use connected project or how to use a web view or how to use Explorer. This is geared towards what we set up to get access and some of the functionality available to you. So I'm not going to go into much more detail than that, but you could, after you get invited to the project, you got some screenshots. Inside that project, there's a tab for ProjectWise web connection, which then gets you in to see, the folders for that given project. As a side note, the connected project also has a share. This is like Dropbox functionality. So this doesn't require a data source permission or anything like that. It is actually just contained within the connected project. So when you get invited to the connected project, that is a very easy way that you guys might want to use to share files back and forth and not have to go into the ProjectWise per se. So I just want to make a side note that that is there. Okay, so ProjectWise Explorer, obviously you need to have Explorer installed. You must have access to the Datasource. That's the theme here. Reminder that this will consume a Visa license, and using Connected Project consumes a Passport license. So just to reiterate those. Okay, so those are the 3 ways. I briefly kind of just wanted to show what some screenshots look like. So hopefully we're all on the same page. So now, how do you get added to the data source? So first of all, it'll have to be done internally. We're not going to let external just add themselves, obviously. So ideally, I think maybe the project manager will do this. You know, I'll show here in a second how it's intended to work. But basically, each consultant will get a user group created for the data source, and we'll add the users by the Bentley IMS account. And then that user group can be added to, you know, the projects they are working on. And we're going to do this, creating the user groups or user list. We're going to manage that in our office, the CADD mapping office. So that's the one part we're gonna set up. But after it's set up, the rest is going to be pretty easy, which hopefully you guys will see here. So the app is set up to do something differently if you're running it internally versus externally. So if you're running it internally, you're going to notice an externals options. And there's going to be add, modify external. And this is already done. I just haven't pushed it out. So I just need to push it out, and this will be out there for internals to use. So when you click this add, modify externals, you're going to get a dialog that's going to pop up. And this is old. We got some cleanup work to do. But basically, this is going to show you all the user lists for the different consultants that we have set up. And so it's as simple as selecting the consultants that you want to add to the project. And so, like, I selected 2LMN. You can add more than one. So if you have more than one consultant, you know, they can all be added. Now, if they're not listed here, that means we have not set up that user list for them yet. And so I added this little button here. It says missing external. Click here. It's going to open up an email. It goes to our office, the ProjectWise team, and we're just going to ask for some information about the consultant, maybe a user, and then we'll go through and set it up. So this is, you know, this setup process is maybe the most time-consuming part, but after you're set up, it's actually going to be quite easy. You just come in here and say, okay, I'm adding this consultant, hit okay, and you can give that consultant read-only access. So this is, we're basically saying this consultant's a part of this project, so it's going to set up the permissions automatically to give that user group permissions. Now, if consultants maybe want to streamline this process, you can reach out to us with maybe your users that you want added, and we can set up this user group for you, maybe even before the PM gets to adding in and they're already there, and make that process a little faster. So it shouldn't take too long. It's really easy to set up. It's really easy to create these user groups. So the goal is to make this as efficient as possible. So hopefully you guys are seeing that. So internally, you just come in and select your consultant, hit OK. And then, you know, if you're creating a new project, like on create mode, when you create it, it'll add that. If you're on a modified mode, you can come in later, go to modified mode, select your project, and then you can add or remove your external here, and then hit modify project, and then it will update the permissions to give them access or remove access if you're removing them. So what happens after that project is created or modified for consultants? You know, you guys are probably used to seeing the folder structure, right? But when you're inside our data source, you're not going to get access to everything, and we're leaning on the side of caution. So I'm not saying that this isn't going to change, but at the start, we're going to be more restrictive than not. And as things get identified, of, oh yeah, we should probably get access to see that, we can easily update the permissions and have that go through. But for now, you know, you're not gonna, the admin folder for now, that is what I'm telling internally, that's the safe zone that, you know, consultants are never gonna see the admin folder. So if there's sensitive stuff in there, that's where it needs to go, is the admin folder. So even if you bring a consultant in, you know, they're not gonna see the folders in red. It just won't even show up. The ones in yellow, they'll be able to see. Again, we can change that, but you know, hopefully most of this stuff is good on CADD, and you're going in the engineering folder, you can get that data. So to be clear, right now we're only talking about adding the consultant to the project, and that's setting up read-only access, right? So I gotta remember not to flip screens too fast, because the way this broadcast goes, I think you guys don't see it if I switch too fast. So let's talk about edit access now. So that's very easy to do, right? You go into your work set, add them, boom, they got access. So now what if they want edit access? So we got to go a step further. Now, first thing I want to say is this is not a requirement. There's not a requirement to work inside our data source. So this is optional. I want to reiterate that if you do work inside our data source, you know, the license charge is on the consultant. So if you want to use Explorer, that visa charge is on you. But we do have it set up to be able to handle this. You know, maybe if it's a heavy collaboration project, that might be a good idea to get into the same data source, and you guys don't have to worry about copying files back and forth because you're both working in the same spot. So how do we add, you know, the consultant to have edit access? So again, we're going to use that create workset app, and it's going to be internally only. So if you're running this internally, when you go to add an additional engineering or survey folder, you're going to get this dialog, and it's only going to show consultants that have been added to this project. So what I just showed earlier, if I go back, right? So in the project info, how we add the externals here. So they have to be added to the project in order to get edit access, right? So if I go back here, if they're not added, like you forgot, I added a button that takes you right back to the same add modify project, and you can add that consultant. Hopefully that makes sense to everyone. You add them to the project, that gets them read-only access, and then if they're working inside our data source, then the idea is they're most likely going to need a survey or engineering folder. So when they go to add that additional folder, it's going to set up that access automatically when they actually modify or create that project. So moving on. So what happens when you give a consultant their own folder, like an engineering or survey, they automatically will get edit access to the engineering folder along with a couple other ones. So in this example, the green are edit access. So you'll notice there's a new folder here, which I don't know if we mentioned earlier or not. So the second we get into the mode where the consultant is going to be working, you know, directly in our data source, we realize that the admin folder, you know, is something that stuff goes into, but we want to hold that 000 admin folder to be that safe zone for internals to put, you know, maybe stuff that is sensitive. So when that happens, you'll see a 010 project admin folder, and you'll get edit access to that. So that's how that's working. You can also get edit access to like the standards, reviews, scratch folder. Again, I'm erring on the side of caution here. You know, this is the initial setup for access. As people start using it more, they might identify things that need to change, and we can change that access, but this is kind of how it's working. Hopefully that makes sense. I tried to make this so that it's a streamlined process. So you really just open this app and add the folder, they get access. Add them to the project, they get edit access or read-only access. So what if you don't work inside the data source? What happens then? So if you're not working inside the data source, meaning your files are, you know, stored somewhere else, you still have to follow those electronic deliverable guidelines that we have. So we still want the CAD files at the end of the day. We still want those. So you still have to submit those. Now I do recognize I need to update the project indexer app, so that's on my to-do list. You know, I want to make sure that the index is including things like the DGNWS file or, you know, the seed files within the workset standards. And I also need to make sure it recognizes those additional survey engineering folders. So if you guys on the consultant side, you know, you maybe have subs and you're creating those other additional folders for them to work in, you know, I want to make sure I retain that data as well. So when you submit it, you know, it all stays in the same structure. We know, you know, who did what and how it was organized. So that is coming, the project indexer app update, to be, you know, a little more geared towards the way Connect works. So that will be coming. So after you submit the zip file, what's the plan then? You know, obviously we want to get everything into ProjectWise. So once it is submitted or resubmitted, because if you have a change, you know, we want those changes too. So you can just resubmit that zip file. This is another thing on my to-do list that I just need to finish off is internally we're going to just have an app to import that data, and what it'll do is it will identify, you know, those things like the additional engineering folders, and it'll create those in our data source to have those additional engineering folders or survey folders, and bring in stuff from like their 990 workset standards folder, so it just works a little better. So and then be able to handle those resubmissions. So I only want to keep the live or most up to date. So we'll just overwrite on resubmission, but we can keep the zip file as backup if we need to. That's kind of the intended workflow. That way ProjectWise does get all the data and it's accessible. So that is coming too. So there's just more info for both externals and internals. That's how we plan on handling that. Now, I think I saw a question come in, or maybe it was through an email about this meeting. When it gets to contracts, we're not updating that system just yet. So it's, you know, maybe in the future it'll look to ProjectWise, but for right now, the bid docs and all that kind of stuff is still going to be the way it's handled right now. So if that is a question, it's still going to be a reference only. The zip file is just going to be, you know, put there out for reference with the bidding. So that's not changing just yet, but it would be pretty cool just to say, hey, the files are here. So that is a little further off. You've got to do one step at a time here. So with that, we are done. I know we're definitely over time, but hopefully you guys found this informative. We'll stick on. We'll listen to any chat that you guys might have. Let me see if there's any new questions.
Yeah, JD, there was a question there about save view.
Does the save view alteration allow shape boundaries to not have to be recut for cross sections? So when you say shape boundaries, are you talking about the name boundary, I would assume, and changing that size? That is not, there's some problems with that, especially on annotation, if that's what this question is about. Let me publish this so you guys can all see that. Make sure I read that right. Does the saved view alteration allow shape boundaries to not have to be recut? So no, it doesn't. If you're adding another section in or changing those name boundaries, especially adding a section, you have to recut. What I was showing with the save views and the level display it was just about level display. Everything else is still working the same way. If that's, I think that's where you're going with that question. So I know we're a minute behind, so it might take him a while to chat in there. But if you guys have any other questions, feel free to put that in the Q&A and we can address them. We'll have this recording available in the next couple of days on our wiki page.
Did you want to just throw that answer in the published chat?
What? No. I will also add for that changing the boundaries. Bentley's aware of that. So they are working towards a solution for that. That's probably one of my top priorities. Is I need to be able to do things like modify after they're cut and not have to recut the stuff. So that's they are aware. It's a pretty big change though. It's got to go all the way back to migration platform and then come back up. So we're not the only DOT as well. So this is definitely a big push coming from multiple people. So Bentley is working on that.
We're just going to give them a few more minutes then for questions.
Yeah. So yeah, if you guys are still on, we're done. Thanks for attending. We're gonna stick on here, and you guys can keep asking questions. We'll try to answer them. As always, you can submit a support request to us, and we can address it that way as well.
Again, I just want to say thank you to everyone who attended today, and we look forward to seeing you again at our December CAD Users Group meeting. So thank you again, and have a great day.
Thank you.
Oh, I was just about to end it. We got a comment in. Will we
I
get an
see that.
email for CPDs, and how does that work? So for the CPDs, we'll do what we did last time. So I get attendance list from this meeting once it's over, and your email will be associated with your attendance unless you signed on anonymously. Then I have no way to prove that you actually came because you're anonymous. And I'll send out the CPDs that I can actually prove that you came. So if you're watching with a group in a conference room, that might not be conducive. But that I'm trying to follow the guidelines for the state board. Ultimately your use of CPDs is at the discretion of them, but it's up to you to decide if that CPD qualifies or not. It's on my end. I'm just making sure that I can verify that you were there, especially with these online things. So if you signed it anonymously or you came in a group, there's really not a way for me to send you CPDs because I can't prove that you were on. So, but that's kind of the way it always is with online stuff. So I apologize. We probably should have made that clear from the start. So moving forward, we'll have that. You have that knowledge now. I didn't mean to sound insensitive there. That came off wrong, but. And it'll just be an email with the PDF attached, like we always have done.
You're going to add the links for the recording as well in that email?
Yeah, I think I normally put it on the the second page of the CPD is the agenda.
Okay.
And then I think I'd normally put the, well, yeah, I normally put the link there. So it'll be on the PDF link probably. But I can add to the email too. Oh, another one came in. Oh, thank you. Okay. We'll stay on here a little bit longer, see if any more chat pops in, and then we'll end this.